Good morning. Hi, my name is Mike McWilliams. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for Reliable IT, and I welcome you to our second annual Executive Banking Summit. I would like to do the first thing is introduce Lance Godsword as I was the MC last year. Everyone said I did not do a very good job, so I am now handing it over to a professional. And then is Lance Godsworth. Lance and I have worked together for the last 20 years. He is an executive in our business here at Reliable IT and handles a lot of our clients. So Lance, you're in great hands with Lance. Take it away, and we'll talk to you shortly.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Reliable IT Banking Summit webinar. My name is Lance Godsword, and I'll be your MC for this event. I'll tell you, we're disappointed not to be doing this in person. We'd love to be in beautiful California right now, but we thought it would be the right thing to do this via webinar due to COVID and some of the challenges there. We know this event is going to be slightly different than in years past, but we are confident that our panel of speakers is going to make your time well spent and valuable. We have a fantastic panel of speakers today, and we're really excited to get them in front of you. We know that you're going to walk away from this event with a better understanding of security, some current threats, and as always, a few new tricks in your bag. This is our second annual Executive Banking Summit. Last year's event, like I said, was in California in Huntington Beach, and our plan is to be back there again next year. This summit really began as a way to bring colleagues together, a way to share information and network and expose our participants to new technology, emerging solutions, things along those lines. Our attendees last year basically said they were really excited about what they learned, and they were really hoping this could be an annual event, and that's absolutely our plan. We will plan to be back in California again next fall, but we'll be talking about that more later in the presentation today. So before we get started, it is my job to talk through a few housekeeping items. First, if at any time you have a question, and we do highly encourage questions from our audience, please put that in the chat box. When that happens, what you'll see is either Mike or I will receive your question. We will get the attention of the speaker. We'll get that question in front of the speaker as quickly as we possibly can. And in our previous events, we've done a reasonable job of having that hit in a timely fashion. Second, just like in years past, our team is going to be asking questions of the audience. That's of you. So be ready. It's a little bit of a quiz, but mostly what it is we want to draw some attention to some key points that our speakers are presenting. And if you are the first person to respond by typing the answer in the chat box, you will get a nice little prize. So, and then finally, lunch is on us. Taya is going to be sending all of you a $25 gift card through email for a DoorDash lunch. Be on the lookout for that toward the end of the webinar or toward lunchtime. Okay, you've heard enough of me. Now let's get to the real reason you're here. We want to hear our speakers. Let's get started. For our first session, I'd like to introduce you to our first set of keynote speakers, Rich McCrae and Bob Hickok. Rich has over 30 years of experience in conducting IT risk assessments and audits with the public and private sectors. Initially trained as a financial compliance auditor with the Montana Legislative Auditor's Office, he later transitioned into audits of information technology systems and platforms, and also managed annual service organization control audits over centralized payroll, warrant, and accounting operations. Rich is focused primarily within financial institutions, where he completes IT general control audits, risk assessments, policy development projects in accordance with the FF-IEC GLBA guidelines. Speaking with Rich is Bob Hickok, who has 25 years serving community banks, performing and managing hundreds of IT control reviews, vulnerability assessments, penetration tests, and social engineering tests. As both a CPA and an IT technician, he combines the skill sets of cybersecurity, auditing, technician and controls testing to provide a unique approach to IT auditing, security testing, and consulting. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you very much, Lance. We're glad to be here with you all today. We're glad to join in on the Reliable IT Executive Banking Summit webinar. Too bad it couldn't be in California, but we'll look forward to that next year. So please go ahead and advance the slide. So there's Rich and my info again, but Lance has definitely covered that for us. So please move forward. So quick look at the agenda for today's session. There's, of course, a lot of topics that could be covered when we talk about IT audit. There's so many things, and so we'll touch on some of that today. But we thought we'd take some look at current cyber threats that are happening to all of us, really coming at us. Some specific questions from bankers that was provided to us from a Bankers Association, whose tech committee, we were asking for some input when we did a similar speech for them, very current questions from them. And then lastly, more of it is about some of the top findings and recommendations that we see in IT audits. So some of the, I know some of the other speakers today are covering cyber threats, so I will try not to belabor the point, but I think it's very good to know what attacks we're talking about, which come into play really. I mean, it's one thing to get good results on your audit, but all of that should be geared towards preventing attacks and risks that we need to watch out for. So some of those attacks that I wanted to point out, or some interesting twists to them. Of course, there's been a lot of attacks on remote workers during the COVID-19 era. So many of the workers are now using their personal PCs for remote access, whether they're coming in through a VPN, hopefully, or some other method to get into their work network. And remote working was entirely new for most of those employees. I can think of one bank client whose audit I did recently, a pretty good sized bank, a regional community bank, but they had typically had about 10 people who had been using their VPN regularly for remote work. That bumped up to 80 just in the matter of a couple of weeks. So all kinds of new threats that those employees need to be watching out for now that they're working remotely. A lot of them are using home computers, and that security is not as robust as the corporate networks is, either at preventing those attacks or at identifying them when they do have something hit them. And then it's important to remember that most attacks are still starting with phishing. Once a person is phished, then the whatever vulnerabilities can be found by the attacker are exploited. There's a variety of those vulnerabilities. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Ransomware, of course, is something we've probably all heard about a lot for quite a few years now. I've been helping some smaller clients, maybe 8 to 10 years on that. But those attacks are up as much as 800% during the pandemic. That's according to Monster Cloud. It's just a target-rich environment for ransomware, as with many other types of attacks. Ransomware has also been hitting and crippling or greatly affecting larger corporations too. We'll take a quick look at some of those. And then ransomware is using new tactics and strategy. Again, we'll go into more detail on that. Phishing attacks have also been on the increase. Even just COVID-themed alone, phishing attacks and social engineering attacks have increased from a level of none related to COVID in prior to February, probably up to about 20 to 30,000 phishing attacks related to COVID employees, according to Microsoft every day. One other type of attack I didn't put on there, but is very important to some of the controls and IT audit topics we're talking about today, is credential stuffing or password spraying attacks. If you're not familiar with that, that's a technique used. It's using automated tools and botnets to attempt authentication across online platforms with stolen credentials. Pretty dry explanation there, but so FBI in just last month put out an alert about credential stuffing attacks against U.S. financial sectors companies. Quick step aside, what that really has to do with is so much of our information has been breached in so many information security incidents over the last decade or more. And in many of those, the username and the password was stolen. And so if we allow people to reuse those same usernames and passwords, the bad guys have them, they can pump them into tools, and then they can try and log in as the user. So that's part of the reason why we have to have them employees and users, customers alike, changing their passwords regularly, but also not allowing them to maybe use shorter and weaker ones that they might have already had breached somewhere. And so a long list of people have that in their hands. So since 2017, nearly 50,000 accounts have been compromised. Those victims just compromised through this one type of attack. Those victims include banks, financial services, insurance, and investment companies. Credential stuffing attacks have accounted for the greatest volume of security incidents in the financial sector, and that's as much as 41% of total incidents from 2017 to 2019. And then the costs have affected the businesses on an average of about 6 million per year. That doesn't include the loss, that's just dealing with the incident itself. So it can be substantial cost to each person affected by that. Ransomware, as I said, has been going through some changes lately. Some of their changes are, well, really they're important changes that I'm going to talk about are directly related to the attacker making their money or not. You know, this is their business. They're pretty serious about it. And so one of the changes that's been seen is exfiltrating the data before encrypting it, and couple that with using better encryption. They found that a lot of times people didn't have to pay the ransom because the encryption was done poorly. And so, of course, they want you to pay the ransom. Another thing about that, though, is taking the data out, getting a copy of it before they just encrypt it on your systems. So that's been used in certain ransomware attack tools like Maze and Prolock, to where they want to leak your information out. So if they encrypt it and you don't pay the ransom because you've got good backups and other methods to get past it, then they'll go ahead and leverage their attack against you and start dripping out either your private data or your customer's private data out onto the web, where it can be seen by others, pressuring you to pay a ransom for just the exposure of that information. Traditionally, it was just locking your data from you. Another ransomware development is ransom denial of service. We've likely all heard about DOS attacks, denial of service attacks, where it's just often it's just throwing traffic at something that you have that your customers can no longer get to because the denial of service attack. So one example that has affected financial institutions is a group claiming to be Fancy Bear, which is a APT, Advanced Persistent Threat Group, and demanding payment in Bitcoin. So they'll just throw DOS attacks at you until you pay the ransom, and then they'll back off and your systems once again become available to the rightful users. Other industries have been attacked with ransomware in different ways also, especially hitting the availability of the systems. Some big name attacks that have happened in recent months were against Garmin, ransomware knocking out their Pilot and InReach services. Those were taken down offline, and that's actually life-threatening. The Pilot is used by airplane pilots, and InReach is often used by people who are off the grid, hiking or whatever, out back. And certainly if they're not getting to use their maps at all, or it's wrong information or not timely, it was life-threatening for some of them. Honda was attacked in a way that they actually had to shut down several factories. It just had to completely shut down production because, again, their systems were ransomed. They didn't pay the ransom. They chose to shut everything down and clean up their systems and then get back online. No small feat for them, I'm sure. And then lastly, attacks of these types are on the rise. They're more targeted, and the recovery costs are increasing. Okay, Lance, Mike. So some of the questions from bankers, like I said, it's always best if we can tailor our presentation to the concerns of the groups. And so we had a few here that highlight what some bankers' concerns were recently. And the first of those, a lot of information on the slide there, but there's a lot to be talked about. So the cybersecurity policy or program, this bank had asked, they were asked to create a cybersecurity policy or program and to detail the purpose of cybersecurity assessment. The CAT tool that you're probably familiar with from the FFIEC came out in 2015. To also identify the goals of the assessment and the frequency with which the assessment should be reviewed and provided to management. And so really for quite a few years, my first point there is Each of these two FFIEC documents, which were released with the CAT, the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, describe very important insight into the process, including the details and the benefits. So it's not like you can get all of your information to address that banker's concern from these two documents. But I've been encouraging many boards to do this, even just as training to get more familiar with their role. So the first of those is the general observations. That is even right in its opening paragraphs. It's directed to CEOs and boards. It turns out to be 20 questions that someone should consider when evaluating cybersecurity at a bank. It really kind of goes through the sections of the CAT itself. What kind of connectivity do you have? What technology is in use? Why it matters? Why it presents risk? And that kind of sums up the inherent risk side of your CAT as you go through it. And then on the cybersecurity maturity side, it talks about some of the controls that you could have in place. And then, like I alluded to there, the 20 questions are little inset boxes, great discussion points for that bank to then discuss with themselves or with their IT experts. How does this affect us? How is it controlled? What better controls could we have in place if we don't now? And the second of those I want to point out is the overview for chief executive officers and boards of directors. Again, these really do explain what we should be gaining out of that process. Ultimately, the board is responsible for everything at the bank. However, many boards, many directors on bank boards may not have a background in IT. So a lot of this is foreign to them, not always an easy abstract idea to get a hold of. So I think those are well-planned documents that can be helpful in this matter. I also want to point out that there's an Excel version of the CAT which facilitates the annual reviews. Those reviews should be annual. And just like with a firewall, you want to test it when you make changes to it. When you have changes to your systems, your risks, your connectivity, and your controls, that's also times when we should revisit the CAT. So there's a link there to where you can get that Excel file. But the reason I think that's important to mention is I've had many small community banks who will kind of say in the board minutes that nothing's really changed in our environment since last year, so we're really not going to go through the CAT again. And then through the discussion with them, they said, well, we're using the PDF, and so it's not really convenient to redo the whole thing. So just want to point out that if you've got an Excel version, sometimes that really can make it so much easier that doing continuous reviews or annual reviews are much easier. Generally, you should work to achieve baseline in all of your control areas, but don't stop there. Work to increase maturity and preparedness. No one would be asking you to just do things for the sake of doing things, but the attackers are not sitting back on their laurels. And so as once you do achieve baseline in all the areas, if you have certain areas where your connectivity, your inherent risk says we've got a little more risk here or there, or perhaps you might even have some areas where the grading, the way the CAT does it, you come out as minimal or least. However, you do have some areas that actually have more inherent risk to them. So those are great areas to go ahead and try and look at better controls, things that are a better bang for the buck that you might implement and start and just continuously improve. The FFIEC cybersecurity awareness page itself has many good resources, a lot of good advice and guidance. Not that I'm trying not to give my own answers, but I figure if you can go to a regulatory item for your guidance and your best advice, examiners should have that much more confidence in what your goal is. Also think it's very important to bring up the CIS controls, or that's the Center for Internet Security. This is a group that's traditionally, so they're CIS top 20 controls are controls that have been developed over the last 20 years. Originally, it was the SANS top 20, but that's a set of controls which is very defined. It can really fit across almost any industry. And the reason I bring those up is as you dig into them, when you read what one control is or another, it might take a minute to digest it. But when you think through them, really, there's so many of the topics that auditors like us and examiners and bank management, IT management staff has been talking about for years at how we control these risks. So The CIS top 20 controls, it's been shown that if you can implement even just the top 5 of those 20 controls, it can reduce by as much as 85% the likelihood that the attacks that go on worldwide against banks and other industries, they would not be effective against your environment if you could implement those first 5. Move that to if you could implement all 20 of the controls, then more than 90% of the attacks that are known are not going to be successful in your environment. It's just so much bang for the buck. So not only do we want to develop your cybersecurity policy and program within banking and things that you hear about, but just from a straight technology standpoint, really couldn't beat what is the advice given from CIS there. And then lastly on that slide there, I've got some of the information, some of the topics listed that we do see from banks who already have those cybersecurity policies and programs in place. Pretty straightforward list of things there that you would want to address in yours. All right, and Rich?
So I'll take on the next section. Another area we get a lot of comments about or questions on is vendor management. What should be included in our vendor management program? What sort of things do we need to be evaluating in addressing our vendors that we work with? Quite frankly, a matter of identifying how critical those vendors are within your environment. And then doing a risk rating over those vendors. Some key areas to look for, and we do talk about some recommendations later on, but I'll go through a few of these, is evaluating what your vendor security risk is. And that can be primarily focused on, what confidential data does that vendor have access to? What is the quality and or frequency of any external audits that occur over that vendor? Do they have formal security policies in place? Are there any known intrusions within their environment? And are they outsourcing any services to other vendors that might have a direct impact on the services that they provide to you? Another area to evaluate when looking at vendor risk is the quality of service. This includes looking at the support availability and quality of support provided when you have a technical issue that needs to be addressed. Is there a history of any unresolved issues in working with that vendor? And with regard to services provided, and are they getting the issues updated for you and resolved in a timely manner? Another category within the vendor risk assessment when you're looking at these vendors annually is to consider what is their reliance and stability risk. This would apply to is the vendor someone that could be easily replaced if you needed to find a different vendor? Risk would be higher if you're relying over a vendor that's not easily replaceable. What sort of ownership and or management changes have occurred within that vendor's environment? Are they financially stable? And how many years of service have they been in operation? And finally, another category to look at is due diligence risk. And this gets into, as part of your due diligence review, do they have formal contracts in place? And are there in fact confidentiality agreements in place within their organization over the data that you may have granted access to? That may be covered within your contract. So going back to the slide, a few things to consider is in evaluating their criticality and their level of risk. Critical vendors may or may not have higher risks, and vice versa. And the risk may be relative, it is relative to the access and potential access that vendor has to your bank and or customer information. Other things to consider, oftentimes we found long-term vendors within a banking environment can be organizations like your external accounting firm that has been doing your taxes or financial audits. Highly trusted vendors you've dealt with for years. Those tend to be overlooked with regard to including them within your vendor management annual assessment process. Bailey's come up with a vendor management packet that we now share with our clients that explains how do we store the data that you provide to us for audit purposes. How is that data managed through our secure portal? And how do we manage that data among our employees so that you can be confident and that we have the processes in place to control access to that information, and that it's locked down to only those members of our organization that need that access. So similarly, that would apply to other vendors in your environment as well. A couple other things Bob and I were discussing the other day is be aware of other vendors, like including your plastics vendors that produce bank cards. What type of data is getting passed to those vendors and producing those cards? Is it critical, confidential customer information? Your checks providers do have access to information and should also be evaluated in that process. Also, any web-based services, perhaps, loan documentation systems and so on. Those are other areas that basically act as an interface to your own internal systems that ultimately could be obtaining and utilizing critical confidential information. It's very easy to overlook, especially those long-term trusted vendors that you've had relationships with for years. Okay, I think we can move on. Another area to discuss today is data flow diagrams. We often get questions about what do we need within a data flow diagram and why do we need it. And in looking at the guidance over what should be included in a data flow diagram, what I found is there are different descriptions oftentimes, and I think it really falls into size of your organization, whether the information in your computer environment is hosted or managed in-house, the extent of internal custom software changes occurring, that kind of thing. But the key to understand is what data is processed through your computer applications and what are the interfaces where that data, even a file on an annual basis, might get passed to another external system. So generally the purpose behind having a data flow diagram would be to identify and document the critical confidential data flow between one information system and another, whether it's within your environment or externally. The key recommendation we've seen from regulators is be aware of where your data is going to an external organization and what data is that specifically. And really this, in my view, ties back to your IT risk assessment, understanding what systems are in place and what critical data is moving through and where is it going. So that gets into the benefits here of having this information documented. So you've got that historical documentation for future use. Oftentimes we see really good descriptions within disaster recovery program, business impact analysis, that kind of thing, but we may not see the information documented in an actual process flow, or we may not see just a listing of what those systems are and what the key data is and where it's flowing. But yet, looking through your overall IT programs, documentation, and so on, we can kind of piece that together. So I've made recommendations in the past to at least put a narrative together that identifies everything, pulls it together, and maybe refers to the other documentation. Looking back at the CAT tool Bob mentioned earlier, baseline control is to document your data flow diagrams, make sure they're in place, and address that external flow to external systems. The control is referenced to the information security booklet, page 10. That's the is.b.10 within the control referenced here in the slide. And then I think our next slide might give you a very high level view of what a data, okay, actually I've covered a bit of this. I'll go through it really quick. We see different formats, narratives, a network diagram, but we found sometimes the network diagrams provided, the clients give us when we ask for a data flow diagram, they refer us to the network diagram, but it doesn't necessarily identify that data and what systems are getting, are moving what direction and to external systems. And having a system diagram would give you a visual of those core applications and that data flow. Recommendations we've seen also is sometimes certain systems get overlooked in the data flow diagram. That could include Fedline, your wire transfer process. So generally, our recommendation is to be ensure that that one is included, and that you are also providing a high-level narrative that I've mentioned earlier to address what type of data is moving through information systems, where is it going, how is it transferred, how is it secured in that transfer, and where is it stored. And then finally, next slide. Very high level data flow diagram. You can see kind of in the middle is the core software application. A lot of these systems may be integrated, but you may have externally integrated systems that are talking with the core, imaging, loan deposit, loan origination tools, and then reporting, getting statements printed, confidential data there, how is that passed to customers, and so on. This is truly a very high level view, but generally easy to put together. Sometimes the narrative can help, or a visual can help along with the narrative. So I think we'll hand it back to Bob with that.
Thanks, Rich. So then to cover some of the, please go ahead and advance. Cover some of the top recommendations we see, not only from our IT audits that we do with clients, but from regulatory IT exams and from other auditors' reports that we review while we're working with clients. So we've got just a few areas that we're going to mention here. There's quite a few that fall within the management or the governance of IT. The first one there, employee access rights are not removed immediately when the employee is terminated. Of course, what we really need to do is prevent the access to that ex-employee. So you might be just changing their passwords on all of their user accounts on your various systems, or actually removing or disabling the user account, but not leaving it there with the access it did have with the same credentials that had been there is not always being done. In the area of employees' domain or their Windows accounts, we often see that those aren't necessarily reviewed thoroughly enough to catch some of the problems you should be concerned about. One thing I've seen really for just forever, as recently as this year, that if we go in and look at the employee domain accounts, their Windows accounts, with the right tools, we can see details about when their last password change was. It is very common that we'll see user accounts on the bank's network with passwords as much as 10 or 15 years old. Recently, I did one where several admin accounts on that network had 18-year-old passwords. And so there's a few things to have concerns about there. Like I say, it's often a problem with admin level accounts. It used to be that we weren't sure if we could change that without affecting something. Those days ought to be gone, really. But think of who all has known that password within that last 10, 15, 18 years. They still know what the password is. And so even if we keep it pretty closely held, there are, tech support cases, things where if someone needs, for one reason or another, to know what the password is, or just as commonly, ex-employees who used to be your either your third-party IT manager or your employee who did that, they still know what the password is. Some of the passwords that aren't problems with that aren't necessarily easy to see unless you know how it really works. Those passwords could be very weak. They could be unencrypted. The thing to understand there is whatever password rules were in place in your group policies or how, on your network 10 or 15 years ago when that password was set, those are all the stronger that password needs to be. I think it's probably fair to say many of our environments 15 years ago might not have required anything longer than a 4 or 6 character password. Almost certainly didn't require any complexity with punctuation characters, things like that, and may not have even required alphanumeric or capitals to be in there. Those rules are all that password needs to keep until the next time it changes. When they finally change the password, then that depends on what our group policies of the day are. The unencrypted one, I'll talk about it here in a couple of minutes, a touch more, but Microsoft Networks have a setting where you can actually store passwords unencrypted. So there's just no security at all there. Admin rights on everyday login accounts, that's still something that's very common. So if I'm the admin of the network, I do need admin rights sometimes. Most of what I do during the day, I probably don't need admin rights on my daily login. And if I'm the one who gets phished, then it's really game over if my credentials are grabbed by an attacker. So then that attacker can just move through your network and nothing shows up as invalid logins or unusual activity. It just says, yeah, it was the admin who was authenticated when they did that. So definitely some special problems there. Don't list it here, but the password pumping is one of the reasons we need to worry about this. If that admin username and password was used 10, 15, 20 years ago and it's still the same, there's automated tools to try and to take advantage of that, exploit that. User accounts with admin rights, but no need for it. So that might, one of the very common ones I saw for decades was scanning technology vendors would ask you to make a user account for scanning, and it had to be an admin account, they thought, because they typically could not get the scanners to play well with the user account if it wasn't admin rights. And so I think arguably that should be an account you want to have the very lowest rights throughout your environment. If everyone needs to know the scanner password to boot up the machine in the morning and it's an admin, that's just a really bad situation. But there's also something that, previously was your backup account, previously was vendor A's login admin account. A lot of times we see those not disabled, but even if they are disabled, if we know it no longer needs admin rights, why not go ahead and remove that big door to your environment? User accounts no longer used, but not disabled. So again, if we look at those user factors in Active Directory and see that it has never logged in since you built this new server. So if your server's 4 years old and it shows it's never logged in, no one's used that account in the last 4 years. It might be an exception where it's an email account or something like that, but we really should be talking to ourselves and say, why can't we disable it or delete it now if it's really not being used? Another management area of IT where we have often findings are testing of the incident response plan has not been performed or hasn't been performed annually. And so that's just really probably 7 or 8 years. I've consistently had that as one of my most frequent findings. You might do your DR tests and your business continuity tests, but are we really testing incident response so that once you have an information security incident, we've had some training, some walkthroughs on how to address that. So make sure you include cybersecurity incidents, et cetera, in your tests. A couple of things that I'd see were some community bank clients of ours have had really good resources is from, if you're a member of FS-ISAC, I believe they've got some incident response tests that they can provide you with or walk through with you in some instances. There's certainly some core vendors out there I know of who do a very good job of coming out and working with your team or doing it remotely, of course, nowadays, but walking you through an incident type, whether that's an internet outage or a malware hit, or one system's down or another, but testing those is very important so that we're ready to react to them when they actually happen. All right, advance please. So in information security, of course, this is where a lot of our audit findings hit for rather obvious reasons. The first one, there's the need to implement a vulnerability management program. So this is really tied to information security, which is a major part of all IT audits or should be at a bank, but it's also plays into your vulnerability assessments and your pen tests. So there, I think it's very important for bank management team. You don't even have to be the IT manager, but to understand that not all vulnerabilities are patchable. Like I said up front, most attacks start with phishing event, and then whatever's vulnerable gets exploited if the attacker knows how to do it. So it might be end of life software that we can't really patch. It might be misconfigurations in a server or switch, firewall, whatever it might be. Workstation for sure. So some are patchable, but if we're focusing only on what our patch reports say and what our patching program is, there's very many very critical vulnerabilities that might not be addressed or might not be addressed frequently enough. Another item there, many devices on the network are running with the vendor's default admin passwords. Again, if we're doing an IT audit and not engaged to also do the vulnerability assessment inside the bank, I'll still do procedures just to look for certain things that I know are often there, easily exploited, but maybe not a lot of people know how to look at them. But it is very uncommon. Many times every year, I can grab a hold of really with just a minute or two effort. Often I do plug into the network, but I don't log in as anyone on the net, any of your users. But I can often grab a hold of security cameras, storage systems, servers themselves, firewalls, switches, routers. Each of those, if I know how to play with them and know what to exploit, can really be a bad thing for me to have access to. Uh, 1, 2, 3 times a year, I often gain access with vendor default passwords where I could literally delete all of the bank's virtual servers. Every server they have except the core server is often not on that same storage system. But attackers know this stuff as well as I do. Software in use that's end of life or unsupported and vulnerable. I alluded to that up top. So that software is not going to show up as needing to be patched because it's end of life and maybe you installed the last patch. But if that was last year or 2 years ago or 6 months ago that you installed the last patch, it no longer shows as needing to be patched. And really all you can do is take it out of use to remove the vulnerability it presents to your network. Privileged user accounts activity is not being logged or not being reviewed. So again, those admin users, we expect that our admins need to do things with them, and certain activity looks normal if we knew that it was the admin that was using it. But if an attacker grabs a hold of that privileged user account, then their activity, you should at least be reviewing what things happen under those privileged accounts. Network access controls, or NAC, are often not in place. And so that prevents us from being able to identify new or unauthorized devices as they come onto your network, new users, new connections, et cetera. And so even if we stop short of needing to know that information to protect unknown things on our network, even if we know we've got a whatever device on the network, if we don't really have it in view, then we may not know who's responsible to patch it or upgrade it or identify vulnerabilities that need to be mitigated. So really just having full visibility. One of the problems there I might mention is often if we have a managed service provider and they use brand X or brand Y, Kaseya is a common one, they often would put an agent on all your Windows machines. And sometimes that's the only inventory of your network devices you get is whatever is a Windows machine that also has the network agent on it. That's all that pulls into your inventory. So we should have other tools that really look for anything on the network that it's not known or not being managed with those tools. Firewall rules are not always being reviewed. It is a best practice for someone to be doing an independent review of your firewall rules periodically. Some banks I see do it quarterly, some semi-annually, some annually. But there are many, many times over the last 20 years where I've seen firewall rules that no longer had any reason to be there. In fact, more than once I can think of a client asking me, are you sure that really gives someone access? And I said, yes, it's in your firewall rule. And then they turn to me and say, well, who is that? I can't always answer that if I didn't build the firewall rule set. So anyway, just like you have independent testing done for other reasons, independent review of firewall rules with someone saying, what do you need traffic to do? And then do these rules allow that traffic and nothing that you don't need? It's a very very effective best practice that we don't see followed often enough. And then lastly on this slide, change management procedures are not always formalized or no policy. Of course, there's a variety of reasons we want to know change management is formalized. It could be that when we put in a patch or made a change to a configuration, something stopped working. Well, if we've got a log of that, we can help identify what might have been the cause. In other situations, when we make a change, we definitely want to know who approved it for one reason or another. All right, Mike. Continuing on in information security, common recommendations we have, a lot of times systems hardening isn't followed on a new system that's put in place. The commercial off-the-shelf operating systems and commercial apps often provide functions that aren't actually required. And so they're too chatty, they have open ports, they have services running that are not needed. So hardening is definitely a long-standing best practice that can really reduce risks and threats in your environment. MDM or mobile device management is not always being used or not enforced. And so there you might be using a really good third-party product, something like Moz 360 or of course, the names are escaping me now, but there's many fine products there. Or you might be just using the native Exchange Active Sync EAS controls. But so even if you are using those, a lot of times we'll find that the policies are not enforcing, the policies in those softwares are not enforcing what you need. So your written policy might say to the user, you know, your acceptable use or your bring your own device or your mobile device agreement with the user may say a lot of things that thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do this, but we also have easy controls to prevent or enforce those things. And typically the MDM will have a security policy for iPhone-based, i-based, Apple-based products, and then also one for Android-based. Could just say, you know, it could require that you have a PIN on the device or not. It could require that the mobile device be encrypted or not. And so there's just a lot of easy tools there to put in place controls that we know we want to have enforced. Drive sharing among workstations. This is where one user has access to another user's PC or sometimes servers. There's about 3 ways where sometimes I see that getting granted in that manner. But so one of the first concerns with doing that is something like ransomware. If one of those users gets breached, it could be a matter of seconds, or a worm. It just could be a matter of seconds before all the other workstations that user has full admin rights to are compromised. Other things that are problems there when I do that, I typically will look at maybe an officer who's not an admin, just ask them to use their login to poke around and look at things. Of course, the admin's right over my shoulder watching what I'm doing, or perhaps look at a teller's login where we often would see them having the least access or the least need for access throughout the network. But so as I'm logged in as that user, if I can see everyone else's drives, there's just countless times where I'll find the payroll information, everyone's 401k investment information, or an Excel file named passwords, which is unencrypted or weakly encrypted and has that user's passwords in there. So there's just so many reasons that drive sharing should be disabled. You may need one user to go to another machine periodically for a great list of reasons, but it should stop and say, okay, you're coming at my drive from your drive, what's your username and password, and require credentials. Firewall egress rules not in place or not effective. So we typically think of a firewall as stopping anyone from coming in who's not authorized to come into your network. We need to do exactly the opposite. So we need to stop any traffic from leaving your network if it's not authorized to leave your network. One of the many things that could be tested and should be prevented is FTP access. File transfer protocol, FTP, was what was used to take all the data from Target's network, for example. So I'll do a simple test where I, again, use a workstation or a terminal server, whatever, logged in as one of your users who I know is not admin, so I'm not starting with privileged rights, and then see if I can connect to a FTP server that's not known to the bank, a test server that's safe and everything. If I can send a file out to that FTP server in the internet, so it should prevent me from connecting to the server. It should prevent me from sending a file out to that server. But even if there's some reason you need to allow that traffic, it should only be to certain targets out there, not to just one that I choose. And so if it does happen, then I should then follow up and see if it comes to light. It sends you an alert instantly. Hey, user Joe sent a file out FTP, or at least the next day it should come up on security reports, or at the end of the week, or at the end of the month. A lot of times nothing blocks me from doing it. Nothing ever tells management that I did it. Just many reasons to be concerned about that. DLP, or data loss prevention, is a big topic name for that. Egress rules are one of the many tools that you use to prevent that. Remote access activity into the network is not logged or reported. That's often a finding we have. So whoever's coming in, whether it's an employee, a third-party provider who needs to help manage your network, whatever it might be, we need to know who comes in, when they came in, where they came in from, how much bytes they worked on, et cetera. That should just coincide with what you've already got request tickets out there for, or however you do it in your environment. But it should either just reinforce, yeah, well, I asked Susie yesterday to come in and fix my printer, so that's what she did at 5 o'clock. Anyway, so the remote access activity there, you don't want to get in the way of it. You don't want to make it inconvenient, but we do need to have the knowledge of who came in when, even if it's what we expected, or maybe more so to know what it's expected and look for anything that's not expected. Domain passwords stored with reversible encryption. Like I said earlier, that's one of the problems with those old passwords is they very well may have been, the password was created when reversible encryption was enabled on the Microsoft domain. With this, I've even talked to our group at Eide Bailey, telling them, hey, I've seen this so often in the last 6 months. I don't know if patches are redoing this or what. So I've been seeing reversible encryption enabled. Microsoft recommends never having that enabled. It is the only reason it was even built in was a very old legacy thing that, in my opinion, really should not be the way we have apps work in the last 15, 20 years. But it was introduced with Server 2000. I don't recall a time when an IT manager ever knew why it was enabled, but when I pointed it out to him and explained because that really is just storing all the passwords on that network in clear text. So again, if I can get a foot anywhere in the network and I know what I'm doing, I can go decrypt those passwords, and I'll have the admin password or whoever's is not encrypted. Again, it's happening so frequently in the last few months. I'm not sure why. I'll be interested to find out why it's happening in all these environments. I've had 3 in the last month or so that were set that way. Some of those I audited last year and were not set that way. Lastly, on that page there, security events not going to the bank. So even if we have a third party managing those things for you, or a SIM in place, bank management, bank IT management certainly should have some awareness of when a virus is found, when malware is found, when intrusion prevents are set off in the firewall or whatever layers you have protecting that, or even just the Windows audit events. If we've got a new user Bob created today, and I have a new user Bob, great, my admin created a Bob account. And if Bob was supposed to be a domain admin and I saw that it was added to domain admins, great, that's what I expected. If neither of those things should have happened, it'd be great to know pretty real time that it did in fact happen on your network. So setting up what's called Windows event logging or auditing is very important, but then having it come to the right people is just as important as whether you log it or not. All right, and Rich.
So we have a few recommendations common over vendor and service provider management. User complementary and user controls within a SOC report. Those should be cross-mapped. There's a section in that report, in addition to any findings that you might be concerned with. These are the controls the vendor is recommending that you have control over and should implement within your environment. So what I like to recommend a client do is at least take that one page from the report and go through each control and identify whether or not those controls are built into your IT risk assessment, that you in fact have those controls in place, or maybe you've determined they're not necessary. Document it once, check the SOC reports going forward for any changes in that area, and the pain of doing it one time up front will pretty much resolve the problem going forward. Review of important vendors may not be fully documented. Again, that's getting back into doing an annual due diligence review and evaluating those vendors in accordance with documented processes. We also see where maybe the vendor reviews don't include all the recommended areas. So we've got these laid out for you here on the slide. The agreements do not include all recommended areas. So there's various guidance out there. Here we're recommending OCC 2013-29. And I think as far as reviewing contracts, you can look at Phil Financial Institution Letter 44-208. And then finally, certain SOC reports may be available for other ancillary systems like bill pay and mobile banking services. Those kind of areas may also have a SOC report that wasn't taken into consideration or getting reviewed by a financial institution.
And just a quick comment on that last one. Sometimes we've pointed out to clients, well, that's okay. But on the last one, not getting SOC reports from each one, sometimes we'll point out to a client that you've got your core provider's primary SOC that covers their core system or your hosted core system, but say you're using their bill pay product, their mobility, their mobile product, et cetera, and there do exist separate reports out there. Sometimes we've gotten feedback that it took weeks for them to find the right person at the vendor who knew that SOC existed, and then it was easy for them to get, and they held on to that name for next year to to find out who to ask for. So the last section here about frequent findings we've got is business continuity planning or disaster recovery. It's only going to take me a couple minutes to go through this area, and I see we've got a little bit of time left. So please do feel free to send in any questions you have. We'd be glad to help you out now or later. But so in business continuity planning, the business impact analysis we see is often not complete. It might be missing the RTO, RPO, or the MAD. That's the recovery time objective, the recovery point objective, and the maximum allowable downtime. And so, so if we should define those. So first, we of course in the BIA we define what assets we need to recover and what their priority is. But so it's very common that we might have the MAD or the RTO in there saying, okay, if that system goes offline, we want to restore it within this amount of time. Or the MAD says, okay, if we're without it for this number of hours or days, it's unacceptable impact on us, and we need to make sure it's up and running. But the RPO, I guess, is maybe the one that I see least often included. And a practical look at that is if we know that, once we know that we're going to need to restore a system or service, how far back in time do we hope to be able to restore it to? If it's your mail server, it'd be great to not lose any mail. If it's your or so many systems, it'd be great to not lose any time, but it may not be practical to have absolute real-time replication of your data. On the other hand, with the introduction of virtualization and how easy it is to do replications and backups now compared to prior to whenever you virtualized, maybe sometime 2010 or a little bit sooner, we can now back up more often. We can now replicate more often. So it may be completely practical that you could back up every 2 hours, especially on your most important servers with a lot of data that changes. If our backup, once we need to go restore, if our backup is a day old or 8 hours old or whatever it might be, do we really want to reprocess all that information? Because we need to go gather the source documents and reprocess whatever was lost when we had to restore back in time. So that's kind of the practicality of the RPO and why it comes into play. It might say that, none of senior management is comfortable having to restore back a day or 2 days or 8 hours, whatever it might be. Can we just increase our backups so that they happen more frequently? And from my seat in the IT admin seat, typically it just means that your replications and backups are going to be smaller windows. They're going to do less data more often. So typically there's just not any degradation to anything, and all we have to do is stop and think about why to do it and set it that way. Business impact analysis doesn't always clearly address the priority to recover IT. So there, I mean the virtual host, your ESX host on which all the rest of the virtualization runs. So if we haven't talked about the need to recover the host, the storage system or the storage area network, the network itself, the routers, the virtual LAN, the VLANs, then we haven't stopped to take a look at what really is the groundwork. So a good example there is recently when I was going through a BIA, they went through all the evaluation of their services and the importance of them, and then in the end they actually gave a priority. This has to be recovered first. If a lot of things are out, this is first, second, and third. So first, second, and third were things like cash letters and other very important services. But fourth on their list was IT services. And if you stop to think about it, if you don't have your network, you're not logging into probably any of those other ancillary systems. And so you could not recover steps 1, 2, and 3 in their situation unless you first recovered the priority number 4. And so putting those in line and sometimes it just seems like IT magic that, we'll get it done. Really, let's not kid ourselves. And depending on what the disaster or the problem was, it may not be as easy to just boot up your virtual system and then everything else on top of it as it is most days. And then the virtual environment and the network servers should be test restored. So not only do you want to restore your core systems, of course, and we've been doing that for decades, but on your Windows systems, all of those, your domain controller, your imaging server, whatever servers you've got in place, your mail server, we should test restore each of those important servers at least annually. Again, it's so much more easily done than it used to be. Sometimes it's really just a couple-hour event nowadays, whereas 8, 10, 12, 15 years ago, that was a whole day process. We're buying a lot of expensive hardware just to see that it can be done off to the side from the actual box that you can't take down. So that's a lot of information there, but those are some of the most common findings that we see. Any questions or comments from the audience? Anything we should address?
Thank you, gentlemen. That was terrific, actually. Lots and lots of very good information. I think that Mike has been fielding questions via chat and via email. So I think he's got a couple of questions from the audience for you.
Yes, the first one is I've got some people asking. It's been a great presentation. They said Bob was great, Richard was okay. He's joking. Want to make sure he's still listening, and also making sure that are we going to post these slides for references? Yes, we are. We're going to charge $1 per slide. So please have your credit cards ready. Again, just joking. We'll be putting this all on our website. And what will happen is that you'll get an email from us when it's done, and then a password to get into this stuff, and so that you can get access to it. But yes, I did get 2 questions, and the first one is that when it comes to firewall review, should our current IT vendor do that? Should an outside vendor do that? Or should we have some managed firewall solution?
I'll field that, Rich. Certainly different options can be fine. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the firewalls I've managed. It's kind of like looking through a document that you've spent days preparing. You may, if you're overlooking things, you're likely overlooking them repeatedly. And so a clean, fresh set of eyes is very important, but that person that's going to do the review also needs to know, review with you what traffic needs to happen and then go through it. So whoever that does it should know that brand of firewall, and because different firewalls get it done differently. They're all doing the exact same stuff, but the tools used or the interface to do it can differ greatly. So being familiar with it is pretty important in my opinion. So if it's your managed service provider who helps you with everything on your network, except maybe you have some other third party manage and monitor your firewall, I would say that that vendor you trust locally who's not already running it every day is a fine choice. Nothing to say that the person who runs it every day can't be the company who does it, but maybe it'd be great for someone in their organization who's not the one who set it up to review it. Again, just a clean set of eyes.
Yeah.
Okay. Richard, anything else on that, or and that's
no. Bob covered what I was expecting him to cover, especially in a managed service provider situation.
Great. Okay. The next question came in, and I'm going to stop for a quick second. Aaron, if you think of anything please come on and share. But the next big question that came in,
Yes,
if there was one thing,
I do.
okay, bear with me, and I'll get to you here in a second. What is the number one takeaway? There was a lot of information on here. And certainly, I'm sure people were taking a tremendous amount of notes. But again, boil it down to one thing, if you can. Tell me that one thing. Hey, Mike, you got to make sure you do this for 2021.
Oh boy, but that's Rich. Does anything come to
Well,
mind for you?
internal vulnerability assessment, patching. Patching is probably the biggest key. If I were to look, offering clients what services should they get from a vendor, the IT audit versus external pen testing versus vulnerability assessment, social engineering, I still think the best value for the dollar is always going to be a internal vulnerability assessment pen test, and make sure that internal vulnerability assessment is done in authenticated mode. And Bob brought that to our attention a couple of years ago. The regulators are pretty much expecting that now. So know what you're getting when you work with an external vendor. They shouldn't just be running the utility, but they should be logged in an authenticated manner to be able to look deeper and wider when they're doing that IVA.
Okay. We actually got two more questions that just came in. Should we do a pen test on the Fedline router?
I would typically include that. It should be silent to you. I typically would always advise that we test every single thing in your network, your DMZ, your demilitarized zone, your brand X, whether it's Jack Henry or Fiserv, whoever it is, any routers they have in place, and the Fedline routers. Now it should absolutely, and your ATM routers for that matter too. Let's include them all. And then if there's an unexpected access to them or a vulnerability in them, we can point it up. But typically we'll find just about nothing we can say about that. Maybe we can say, yeah, it's likely a FortiGate, it's likely a Cisco device. But there have been times when I've tested it where it was not locked down in the manner it should be, or little problems. They're certainly usually buttoned up and we can't hit them, but let's always knock on the door.
Okay. And I hope, Nikki, I hope I say this right. So Nikki is asking, the CAT is done on an annual system, on an annualized basis as systems change. Is this something you require banks every time you go on site?
Yes, we do. We look for that as part of the review. The guidelines are recommending it be done annually, and I would definitely take a look at that link if you're not familiar with it, and use the Excel file that we provided the link to. It's up to date. It's easy to update on an annual basis, save a different version of it from year to year to document your internal annual review. What I like about it is you can use filters to filter out maybe any prior answers that were answered no or yes with compensating controls, and focus right down on maybe actionable areas from the last review, and see if you can get some of those answers moved toward a yes.
Great. Aaron, we got 2 minutes left. Aaron, floor is yours.
Sure. So I was going to add to what Bob says as far as having a second pair of eyes look at something, and just add to how critical that actually is. Because and if you're working with a partner, making sure they do it, or bring in someone from the outside, because and just this morning on that particular subject, we were going through a set of clients, because we go through a subset of clients every quarter doing some of these checks, and firewall rules is one of them. Is the geofencing in, or the right intrusion rules set in there? And when we go through this process, and so we have the security center go through the setup of our field engineers, what they set up, and double check it. And we start with a group of clients, and we go through them every single year or every quarter. And it's pretty common, including this morning, we'll find a small error. It's usually not a big hole, but in our experience, a small hole can turn into a big hole. And so having that second pair of eyes look at that stuff is really, really important. And then when you brought up if there's one thing an organization could do, and of course there's a lot when it comes to security, but I would say think of security as making sure your internal is secure, just as secure as your endpoints. It seems to be there's always this focus on, hey, let's secure the endpoint. Let's put the best antivirus on there. Let's make sure we train people on how to avoid a phishing attack. All really good things. Unfortunately, people will make mistakes at some point, and someone might get onto the endpoint. So then you have to think, well, where do those bad guys go from there? And I think even sometimes our own engineers think, well, you know, this password or this policy setting on this server is fine because it's not exposed to the external internet. But here's the thing, once a bad guy gets onto an endpoint, they're going to figure out how to go from one step to one point of the environment to the next until they find the weakness, right? So any weakness internally can expose you even though it seems minor. So, and it's usually not something, you know, that was expensive to fix. You had to buy a new IT product. A lot of it is just good policy and checking that policy versus big expensive investment.
Perfect. Another question came in. What is the best way to review Office 365 setup and config? Is there a minimum standard setup that we should apply, Bob or Richard?
Certainly, there's a lot of well-documented layers that you can put in place. So knowing what's available is really the first step that could be easily overlooked. Knowing how it applies, talking to some of your peers who have already been through that can be a great help. There are actually some ways where if a user's endpoint gets breached, I've seen it demonstrated, an attacker can get up into that user's Office 365, replicate their rights, and come down into your file system, whether it's SharePoint or local storage on your network. So many times their security in that system is going to be better than what you would have done on your own. It's not a silver bullet. And sorry if I run long, but a couple of things I wanted to add to what Aaron said. Some of the things I see most often in the firewall problems are access to old core vendors. There's one client I can think of who the people managing their firewall 2 years in a row, I had to give them the comment, we need to disable your access to company A who no longer has any relation to you in any way. And then the second year, of course, I was astonished to find that there's still full network connectivity into that old vendor. There's often we find antivirus not enabled, intrusion prevention systems not enabled, etc. A lot of great layers, just cheap bang for the buck built into your firewall, but not enabled. So again, the better a person knows that product sometimes, and I don't know every brand, there's a couple that I know better than others, but knowing it well just takes all the back of the hand stuff and best practices come to light quickly.
Perfect. Perfect. Lance, we'll hand it back to you. We are out of time. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, guys. Terrific talk. And thank you, audience. Some good questions that came in. Really appreciate it. So it's now my turn to ask the audience a couple of questions that came out of the talk. So be ready with the chat box, because remember, the first person to respond with the correct answer is going to get a small prize. So according to Bob and Monster Cloud, ransomware attacks are up what %? All right. Second question came out of Rich's talk. A strong vendor management program will include what key points? And if you include at least 2 and you get them right, you'll get the prize. So, all right, fantastic. Without any further ado, let's move on to our next speaker, Lindy McDonald. Lindy is Reliable IT's Microsoft applications expert. Over the last 15 years, she has built powerful government, manufacturing, and healthcare industry tools. Lindy is the expert that the experts go to for help when it comes to Microsoft applications. Lindy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get...
Lindy, you saw that I gave you control, correct?
Yep, just saw it. Thank you. Okay, I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, share. Do my little F5. Okay,
Yep, perfect. We're seeing your screen now, Lindy. Thank you.
right on. So this is about Power BI, and a lot of analysts in the audience probably have heard of it. Those who don't do a lot of data mining probably haven't heard of it. It's been around for years and years, but it's really taking off just recently. I would say in the past 3 years. So one of the big questions I usually pose to management is how many people do you staff to do certain things related to data mining? And one of those might be preparing slides for executive reviews, gathering all this Excel data for reporting on weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual. Another one is manipulating data to make it in the right format. I know a lot of people do that. Building custom tools to make the data usable. You might have a certain data set that is very not usable, and they have to reformat it, change columns. It can be very tedious. Another one is search for problems in the data set. And that's usually after expending tons of time preparing it so that you can even start analyzing it. And then, of course, another question I ask is like, okay, so you hired an analyst, they're an expert at it, you're paying them $100,000 plus, and they're doing tons of data administration because they don't have time to actually do what you hired them to do. Well, Power BI kind of acts as a solution. So when people say, how do we get rid of that time drain, that money drain? It's like, hey, well, why don't you implement Power BI? It works really great. So a lot of organizations have experienced a 30 to 50% reduction in hours so that their analysts can do better, more qualitative work. Another is schedule data refreshes. This is one of the coolest things about Power BI is that, if you're a leader in the bank, you can easily just get on your mobile phone and see what the latest data is because your analyst set it up to refresh, every night at midnight. So you're always getting the best data. You can set it for more than that, but it just depends on what your needs are and how quickly your environment is changing. So you get those answers sooner so you can make decisions faster and not wait until, next month where all this damage has been done and you could have corrected it 2 weeks before. So, what is Power BI? So it has some very well-known competitors, Tableau being one of them, ClickView. So when you think of these two, they're usually the ones where you see the really pretty dashboards, and I'll do a demo to show you what some of these things look like. But they're data visualizations. They're showing you charts and graphs that you can see in Excel, for example, those cool little bar graphs and line charts, but they take it another level. They take it so that you're seeing data visualizations that you've never seen before in Microsoft. Another really cool thing is that you're kind of marrying that Excel functionality with Microsoft Access. And nobody I've ever met likes to use Access, okay? I get it. But one of the most amazing products of Microsoft is Microsoft Access, and that's because it has a way of connecting data using relational data, relationships where you're connecting multiple reports, and that way you're drilling down and you can see these amazing things. Well, that's Microsoft Access. Meeting Excel, you get Power BI. So another really cool feature about it is it's integrated with your Office 365. You probably already have it. You're already paying for it as part of your Office 365 subscription. So that's one of the coolest things about it, which means it communicates with all these other Office 365 applications. So let's talk a little bit about the Power Platform, and that is Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, formerly Microsoft Flow, and then now the brand new Power Virtual Agents. So this is like the Microsoft Premium platform. They brag about it all the time. They love it. I don't know why PowerPoint's not in it because they like to name everything Power. but this is what it is. And they all talk to each other, just like these things also talk to Excel. They talk to SharePoint. They talk to all these other things, but these are the main new cool kids that Microsoft is selling. They all have free versions, so very cool. Now with Power BI, it's like, okay, how do I access it? What does it look like? So you have three main platforms. You have the desktop application, like when you open up Microsoft Word, it's on your desktop, very similar interface, it's a window. Another one is the online version. So they have a web service version of Power BI. And then the other one is your mobile version, which is kind of like a condensed, reactive format of the Power BI dashboards and visualizations that they provide you. So is it affordable? Yes, like I've been bragging nonstop, right? They have a free plan. That's so cool. But they also have a paid plan. So now, if you have a larger bank that's growing, you might want to have, a larger database, and sometimes that costs a little more. But the number one reason why people get the paid plan is so that they can share with external users. So that might be, for example, your board of directors. Maybe they're not internal to the bank, but they still need to see certain reports, or they want to see some executive reports or something. Then you would give them access. It costs like $10 a month per user to share. So that's usually the number one reason why, but it's very affordable. Competition. So, those other ones we were talking about earlier, Power BI is cheaper than them. So that's another very appealing aspect, is when, some of these other companies are charging small businesses 60, 70K a year for this annual SaaS, basically, subscription as a service. You're getting the same quality or better, because Power BI, I feel personally, as a professional who works with data mining all the time and data visualizations, Power BI outperforms them bar none. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck if you so choose to get the premium subscription. Okay, so now what things can I do with Power BI? So you can author reports and you can share reports. You make these really cool interactive dashboards. Once again, I'll show you it shortly. You can create these really nice reports that can be very beautiful, that can be automatically created. Once you set it up, you can then run it and then print those out. So like when you have auditors come and audit you, or you have your board of directors come and want to see things, maybe they're a paper person, you can print it out and give it to them. So there's lots of really cool ways to package and present, whether it's on the computer or to print it out as a hard copy. And then you save a lot of money, because not only are you saving by not going with competitors, which is, I don't work for either company, Microsoft or these competitors. I'm just telling you that this is the cheaper option. And you're also saving your analysts time so that they can, work better and do more substantive work. Okay, other use cases. So it doesn't just I know we're talking about banking, we're all in banking, but there's other uses within your banking departments that might have value in it. One might be HR. Maybe they want to measure employee satisfaction within your branches. IT, sales, finance, you kind of get the gist. You can measure all kinds of things related to those departments. Another is, okay, so one of the case studies I'm going to jump to here is Metro Bank. And this, when I say Metro Bank, I'm talking about, Microsoft did this, by the way. They did the case study on this, and they got Metro Bank, which is this global bank, has a lot of branches all over the world, tons of money. Anyway, so they needed help, and the Power BI people went there and they said, how can we help you? So they said, we got call center issues. We can't track who's calling. We don't know if the customers are getting resolution. Are they happy when we're done helping them? Another was mobile and internet banking. We all know that, when you're implementing something new like mobile platforms for your clients, they may not be effective, and then they're not using them, but you're paying for this service that they're not pleased with. So you can measure their engagement, see what they're using the mobile platform for. Are they paying bills? Are they just wanting to see their account balance? Da, 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 da. Another is customer service. Okay, that kind of goes back to the call center tracking, but this goes into it another level deeper. Staffing and workload planning, like I said, you know, when you start looking at payroll, one of the biggest expensive cost drivers, right, for any company, then it kind of starts to open your eyes and you go, hey, you know, are we really using all these resources and getting the ROI that we want to see? Okay, so let's talk about why Power BI is different than other competitors. So number one, it connects to your data, which is really cool, right? So if you have a data warehouse, maybe it's on a local drive, maybe you have it on your, you know, your server where you open your little manila folders and you see drive C, D, X, whatever, and you're like, yeah, that's where I put my files on my on-premise data warehouse. It could be a third-party data warehouse like Azure or AWS. SQL platforms are another big one. And then, of course, if you store any data online on the Microsoft applications, the cloud, you can pull that data as well. And then it all feeds into Power BI, nice and neat. And you can see all that data talk to each other. And it's really cool. So this is what you're probably familiar with. If you've heard of Power BI, you've probably heard of these dashboards. So these dashboards, see what I was talking about, the HR, here it is. You know, how many sick days are people using? Who's using them the most? Is it, you know, are they happy when you go do that employee survey and you ask them about, hey, do you really like the amount of sick time we're giving you? Do they rate that highest? Or are they rating something else higher, like maybe you offer them educational benefits or something? So you learn about your resources so you can better use them. That's the whole point of data mining, right? Here's finance. They have really cool custom indicators because Power BI, you can drill down. Here's another one. This is one of my favorites, is the map feature that they have is completely free. And you can drill down further. So like, let's say you upload your client addresses. You upload them and you want to learn about who's coming to your bank, who are these people, how can I serve them better? Well, you can upload your addresses. Microsoft Power BI will plot them on a nice little map, and then you can begin drilling down and learn about, okay, what's their medium disposable income? What is their US average household size? And you learn about all these really cool things completely free. Okay, and then here's another example. You know, last week we were talking a little bit about this, but you know, COVID's a hot issue right now, and they've made all kinds of dashboards and things, and you can click on certain regional areas and drill down and learn about, you know, what's the highest infection rates. So this is another way that you can apply Power BI. Okay, and then another one. So I just want to kind of show you different variations. But now I'm going to switch over and I'm going to demo some of these for you. So let me change my screen here, new share, and I'm going to go to Power BI right here. Okay, sure. All right, so when you open Power BI desktop, this is what it looks like. It's kind of, you know, a little bit familiar to you, probably like when you open any kind of Microsoft applications, bare bones, you're kind of like, okay, what do I do with this, you know? Well, once you learn this interface, which really isn't that hard, you know, once you get into more of the relationship building and things like that, your analysts are going to be, you know, better leverage for that. But here is where the magic happens, and you can create really cool dashboards like this one. So this is a pseudo bank, Western Bank. And this is all sample data and everything like that. But, you know, I want to show you some really cool things about it. Number one is you have these things up here, and they're called slicers. And you might be familiar with them in Excel. But what's nice is, okay, I want to know how my products are doing. How are my personal loans? How are my mortgages performing? You click on them, and it will give you a drill down update, all those visuals, and immediately tell you, okay, this is how it's going. You know, this sector, the consumer or the government, maybe the government's buying a lot of commercial buildings or something. You know, you can see all that nice and neat on here. Maybe you want to drill down to a specific year. Say, I want to see what 2019 was like, and then it will update there. You can choose different quarters. Another cool thing, if you have multiple branches, you can see how different branches are performing, and you can click on them and it will drill down and tell you, okay, Malibu is doing this. They're fantastic. They had a wonderful December, you know, but back in February, they were really not doing well at all. And then you can investigate why, so that next February it doesn't happen again. So that's really neat. Another cool thing here, so maybe this is another example of the Western Bank region here, and you can ask yourself all kinds of questions. You can say, I want to see a comparison between 2019 right here and 2020. Well, there we are. We can see which branches in certain states are performing better. Oh man, it looks like, you know, Utah was crushing it 2 years in a row. You can have these nice familiar database or data table sets. Oh, that looks good, right? Like, oh, that's familiar. I like that. Well, now it's alphabetical. Well, I want to quickly see what the biggest one is. So you can go like this, and you can see your highest performers all the way down to your lowest. Oh my gosh, Oregon's losing. So all these really cool things are all interrelated, all connect. You can say, oh wow, look at October. What's going on in October? Who was driving that? Oh, there was just a great month across the board. Look how this updates. That's really cool. See how it shows you what percentage of the whole pie there relates to October. Nice. Okay, so then we go to this page, and this is delinquency rates of credit cards. So you're making decisions about how intense you should make your requirements to loan out or give out credit cards, right? Well, here you can see, here's a percent of demand of credit card loans. Oh, wow, they're really going down, you know? And banks not in the top 100, they're reporting delinquency rates. Well, it's going down. The demand's going down. Oh, there's a correlation. That makes sense. So these data visualizations really give you that power to either reaffirm or identify those problems. Okay, and these can be so simple. I put this in here just to be super simple, like, oh, this is just a simple graph. Maybe you have the same graphs every month that you go through a PowerPoint deck, right? And you see these same simple ones. You're like, oh, okay, yeah. So you could still recreate those in here. The very nice thing is that they update for you, so you're not copying and pasting into PowerPoint all the time or forgetting to update certain slides. Yada, yada. Okay, here's something cool for IT related things, right? So, you know, when within our IT, we like to track, you know, threats, any kind of cyber issues. Chris has got a really cool presentation later today about how hackers hack. You're going to hear some of these terms, you know, but you might be in here and say, oh, attacks by a source IP, and they have these cool maps, and you can say, oh, look at all these, where are these things coming from? And you can click on them and then see, oh my goodness, this attack here is coming from Middle America or whatever this is, and I can see all these different types of things that are coming out of that. Pretty neat stuff. So then if I go to IT security here, just another way you can change the background. You can change these little things here and move them around, make it your own. You can brand it, you know, put your logo up there, really make it 100% your own. So one more thing I want to show you before I finish this demo is I'm going to switch screens yet again. And I want to show you the, let me move this over before I switch screens. Okay, I want to show you this really cool live ones. Where are they? Well, maybe I need to scroll down a little. There we go.
We're not seeing it yet, Lindy.
All right, can you see it now?
I can, thank you.
Like the Verizon, can you hear me now? Okay, so COVID-19, I just wanted to show you this as a real world application. This is kind of what your external users would see if you so choose to use the web service and send them links that only they can access, or maybe you want everybody in your you know, customers to access or whatever, you can have really great permissions set to restrict that data sharing and everything. But here's what the online version may look like for you guys. You can see here, oh, okay, who's got the most infection? Oh, okay, who's got the least? Well, maybe you just want to reverse it here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so and see, you know, it reversed it, and you can say, oh, well, these countries have none that are infected. And you can just, maybe you wanted, I just think that's so cool. And then you can clear these filters here, very familiar. They have page tabs down here, so you can go learn more information, see more reporting visuals, and you have drill downs familiar here, like combo boxes, you know, if you're familiar those with that web-based interface, you don't need any programming skills to make this all link together. So it's very, you know, it's very familiar and easy to adopt within your organization. This one's running a little bit slow, but usually they're, you know, click your finger and they load really fast. Another thing I want to show one more time, because we all like finance, right? Well, here's a financial dashboard. This is a financial report. Maybe you want to track your account receivables. Maybe I think they have every business unit type thing in this particular one, you know, operative unit, business unit. You can drill down, you can see your vendors. Let's see here. So, I mean, you kind of get the gist, I'm sure. Drill down by location or branches, and just learn about what's going on in your company very quickly. And you can actually export this data, so that maybe you filtered on resale here and you just want to export that to Excel with no other data. You just want to keep it very simple. You can do that. I can't do it in this particular one right here because it's the online version and they're not, the permission set for this won't let me, but they usually have a little button up here, drop down, export it. You can see it in a nice little table and download it. So all kinds of really cool stuff there. So does anybody have any questions related to this? I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, Lindy, we got a couple questions from the audience, and one, I think you mentioned this, but let me ask it again. You'd mentioned that that this was a part of Microsoft 365. What version do you have to have in order to have access to Power BI?
Okay, so if you have Office 365, which is like a subscription-based service, they're always putting the latest and greatest versions out there. So if whatever you have now, you should be able to access Power BI. You know, www.powerbi.com. Go there. You can download the desktop application very easily. You know, and then start playing with it, and it's a lot of fun and you can get familiar with it. And if you get really deep into it and you really want some advanced things that maybe you have very special situations, RIT can always help you with that. But you know, the initial learning curve is there, but once you get past that, I mean, the world is yours.
Yeah, and that's I'm looking for the specific version. I think an E3 or above has that available to you, or you can purchase it for $10 a month if you.
I think you can get it even below enterprise level, but maybe they change it. So Microsoft likes to change their licensing structure quite a bit, but Power BI itself has been available for years. The free version, the desktop version that you can download.
Sorry. Yeah, let me clarify that. The free version is absolutely available. Free of charge. Certainly the paid for version is included.
Oh yeah.
Free, and or if you don't have E3, Microsoft 365 E3, you can purchase it a la carte for $10.
Yes, understood. Yep,
Sorry,
I agree, Michael.
I did not. That wasn't. I asked the question wrong. The question was right. I asked it.
That's okay.
The other thing that another question that came in is, hey, our core system does not have great reporting. How hard is it to implement Power BI?
You know, it depends on the individual organization. So if you have an on-prem data warehouse and maybe you have a lot of different things that make it more difficult to access that data warehouse, you know, then it's a little bit more difficult. But if you have a traditional setup where you have maybe an on-prem, you know, even a network folder with a bunch of Excel files in it or whatever. You can even download PDFs, and it will scrub them and pull the data out of PDFs. So I mean, if you have a folder anywhere, pretty much Power BI, there's a way to pull it and get that data to run for you. So, you know, I would really get, you know, maybe just ask for a consultation or something to understand what your organization's needs are, and that is probably the best way to answer that.
Perfect. Aaron, did you have anything to add? That was all the questions.
Nikki had some questions here related to, or do we have any banks that are using this for their board reports? And not that I'm aware of, however, we do have banking clients that are going in that direction. So this all came about actually because we started using Power BI at RIT to present our security information and reporting, particularly through our SIM product. And couldn't help to notice, being in IT steering committees, that banks use a lot of Excel. They seem to be very heavy users of it. And you got people spending hours and hours putting together these very in-depth Excel reports. And so we've started working with banks, doing consultative engagement, bringing in Lindy and others on our team to help these banks make use of Power BI. It really starts with an investigation and discovery, and then some training to get it going. But I would say it's not a huge investment for a very big return. I mean, if in your bank, if you have people pulling reports in Excel and spending, you know, several hundred hours a month or 100 hours a month, using this will give you a much better visual deliverable, and probably greatly reduce the amount of time that's spent on that. So the ROI is pretty straightforward for most of our clients that we've started to work with. And it just really happened by us showing our reports and our clients asking, well, what is that? And so we started explaining it. And next thing you know, we started helping our clients use Power BI. So we thought we would present it today.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Aaron. Lance, we'll turn it back to you. And
Yeah, you bet.
give me control again. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Great job, as always. Really appreciate it. So what I'd like to do quickly before we go to break is ask one question to the audience. Please quickly respond if you feel like you know the answer. Power BI basically replaces which two commonly used Microsoft applications? All right, very good. So we are ready for a break. We're running just a couple of minutes late. We're going to eat that gap up during the break. We are going to all come back and start again at 10 minutes until the hour. Just a quick restroom or coffee break. So we'll see you in about 8 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
There we go.
Chris, why don't you go ahead and talk so we can hear you?
Can you hear me okay? Test, test.
We can. Thank you.
We gotcha. Fantastic. All right, it is 10 minutes till the hour. It looks like Chris is ready to go, and we are ready to kick off our next presentation. Chris Peterson is a VCIO, or Virtual Chief Information Officer for Reliable IT, a position where he spends his day helping our customers navigate the complexities of IT and cybersecurity. Chris has held various positions over the last 20 years in the IT industry, and he is a graduate of the SMU engineering program. Chris is a devoted father and husband, and an enthusiastic owner of 27 different reptiles and amphibians that live in 15 different aquariums that you may see some of in his screen behind him. His home is truly a jungle. He's going to show us how important it is to have great security. Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Lance. All right. Thanks everyone for being on this seminar. So let's get started. So first thing we're going to talk about is the different types of hackers. So the first one is you just have young kids. Young kids, they're out there having fun. They're also known as script kiddies, which basically means that they're going out, downloading scripts, not knowing if they really work or not, and trying them against the network. They also use applications like a low orbit ion cannon, which sounds kind of funny, but basically what it does is it's doing denial of service attacks for them. The other thing that they do as well too is they do and can download pen testing apps just like anyone else. So as a quick example, this little device here is a Raspberry Pi. Got that for free. Downloaded, went over to Walgreens, got a little bitty chip, and I downloaded all of the pen testing apps that I would normally use during this demo on this device. Now you can get much fancier ones where you can spend a lot of money which have network cards, but a little device like this can be hidden pretty much anywhere that you want to. Is it wireless? Yes. Can it be powered up from a battery pack? Yes. Can it be powered up from an iPhone? Yes. Can it be powered up from the wall? Yes. Can you put a little solar panel on it if you so wish? You can. You can put cameras, you can do whatever you want to with it. Super, super easy, yet really, really powerful. All right. The next thing you have is recreational hacker. So recreational hacker, they're a little bit more savvier than your normal, just someone having fun with the system. Maybe they have a valid reason that they want to get on the system. Maybe they're upset for being let go, or maybe they're just an internal disgruntled employee and they just want to disrupt operations. The next you have a professional. You have a hacktivist. Maybe they have they feel very strongly and passionate about a subject, let's say maybe smoking, and they may go to let's say Marlboro or something like that and try to deface the site to put up their protest. They're not really trying to get any money out of it. They just want everyone to hear their side. They also too they'll even try to, the APTs will actually try to break into get people's money, try to steal accounts, things like that. All right, the last one is insider threat. So an insider threat pretty much is current or former employee. I know personally I've been involved with at least 2 big, huge insider threats where the whole network was wiped out. Defined, wiped out, everything was gone. The phone system was gone, the backups, everything was gone. So, including cutting the power cables to the data center, which is pretty extreme. All right, what do they want? They want to ransom your data. They want to get PHI out of you. They want to get PII out as well too. Steal any secrets that you have right now with the coronavirus going on. That's a big one, stealing secrets on the cure and or treatment. Obtain passwords. They want to get credit card information. And the other thing that they want to do is just create as much traffic to a website to shut it down. I know here in Texas, Spring ISD had an issue where their site was having a denial of service attack when they first came online for training. Cypher did a little bit too, but they were able to defeat it. Another one as an example, of that is, I don't know how many people are into Funko Pops, the little figures. Their site had a denial of service attack against it as well too, which basically brought them down to their knees. So, all right. So now what we'll do is we'll dive off a little bit more into some of these terms. So that way, when you go back to your IT department, you're talking to your IT team, you kind of know what they're talking about. Stealing passwords and getting in the system, that's pretty straightforward. It's not too far off of what it is. Backdoor, basically that's just a way for a hacker to get in. That could be an old service account that's sitting out there. That could be a scanning account that we talked about earlier that's just sitting there. Maybe the password's never changed, or maybe even an admin account that hasn't changed in years or decades because you don't know where everything goes. So that's an easy way for them to get in as well too. And then in some cases, they'll even create themselves their own account and kind of just leave it sitting there mixed in with everything. However, just like we do, we audit those security groups so that way we can go through them once a quarter to find out who's in them or not, and if they're legitimate people. Buffer overflow. You see that a lot with SQL databases. Basically, it's very similar to a denial of service attack, which basically it just keeps making as many transactions as possible, right or good or bad, so that way all of the CPU power for that SQL server and or read writes to the database are taken up. So way that translate down to the user, maybe your teller has a particular application that's tied into it, and now pulling up records is slower because of that. Denial of service attack, we talked about that. Root access, it's the same thing as you have the highest rights in the network. You can have enterprise admin rights and so on and so forth, or root if you have a Linux box. So that way you can pretty much do anything that you want to within your system. And I can just say, I know a lot of people will say, hey, I need full admin rights. No, not necessarily. Let's really take a step, look at that, look and see what you need. I know on like folders, people will say, I need full control. Well, no, you really need modify so you can read, write, delete files. You don't really need full control because with full control, you can change permissions. So most users don't need to change permissions. So that's just a couple of examples. Trojan horse, just as it sounds, basically it comes in as one thing, but is actually doing things behind the scenes. And we'll show that a little bit here in the demo. All right, so a hacking timeline, just a general timeline of once the compromise happens down to any kind of containment. So a compromise can be very, very quickly, seconds or minutes getting into the system. And keep in mind with this whole timeline and everything, a hacker only has to be right once. Your IT team and your organization has to be right every time. So with this, you know, you really have to be on top of everything, not just, oh, I got another report. Oh, okay, I'll just go set this aside. Or, oh, I got another alert on my phone. I know what it is. Really look into it and dig just to be on that safe side because you never know. So the compromise, then the exfiltration, bypassing the active network monitoring, that can happen, especially I've seen it where not a SQL server, an Active Directory server, you may have security turned on. You may have security turned on and say, I've got it on, Chris. It's auditing, it's pulling all that information. But have you ever gone in there and really looked to see how often your Active Directory security logs are looping over themselves? Like, is it every 8 hours, every 4 hours? Because if it is, by that time, you know, it's already looped and cleared, and you would have no idea when that person got in because the logs have already cleared out. The next, within days and weeks, now you're talking about discovery. Now you're bringing in law enforcement. One thing I know that we've learned from law enforcement is as soon as you think that you've been reached, pick up the phone and call local law enforcement and let them know what's going on. Don't wait 3-4 weeks down the road and call them because by then evidence is gone, logs are gone. So make sure you call as soon as possible. And then along with that is containment, trying to contain it. So what we normally request our customers do is as soon as we see a machine that has been infected, we immediately cut it off from the network. Cutting off it from the network is actually physically powering it down and pulling the network jack out, because there are some exploits that you can upload into the firmware of a network card Because if you ever notice, sometimes when you have your machine off or maybe you're logged out, you see the network card sitting there still blinking because it can still have some power, especially if you have PoE devices. All right. So hacking. Here's my good buddy here. I always get Mike and I get a good chuckle about this guy. So this is your internet tough guy. He is sitting at home in his mom's basement, friend's house, coffee shop, fill in the blank, and he is invincible behind that keyboard. He can pretty much do anything that he wants to do. Just like with the script kiddies, if he can get in, okay, no problem. And he'll move right on. He'll move right on to the next, and he'll just keep going and going and going. He may be hiding himself. All right. Next, the other thing too, you have Kevin Smith here. Same thing. He's going through, he's hacking, he's trying to get as much information as he can so that way he can sell that out on the dark web, which sits at another layer, which is called the onion. You can go out, you can go out there, average people, you can get browsers that can read that, and you can go out there and see. I wouldn't generally recommend it unless you know exactly what you're doing and where you're going. But that's where a lot of the credit card information, user account information gets posted out there. And I know we run those dark web scans periodically for our customers as well too, just to kind of see. I think even Aaron had mentioned the other day he ran it and there was a password sitting out there that was like 4 or 5 years old. However, it was the same password that they were using to get into their core process, which might have been either Jack Henry or FIS, one of the two. So you really got to watch what you're doing out there and change your password. You know, as just a funny example, you know, password 123 is great, but you don't want to go password 1234, password 12345. You know, because I'm going to guess that you're going to keep going in order like that. So you really try to mix it up. Try not to use, you know, dogs' names. Try not to use anything related to you. Something just completely obscure. So, all right. So the hacking process. What we're going to do here is I'm actually going to I'm going to hack someone's job, if you will, and I'll explain that a little bit. So in this particular case, I'm trying to get past the firewall. How do I get my file past that firewall without touching the firewall, without you knowing about that? Well, one way I can do that is by hacking someone's job. So the way you hack someone's job is you find HR. What's one of the things that HR representatives do is they read resumes. So I've got to get a resume to that person, which basically means that I'm uploading a file into your network already. So we're going to use this as an example. This is a live site. I've kind of blanked out the name to protect the innocent here. But what I'm looking for is the careers area. So we're going to go into careers, and I just randomly picked graphic designer. You probably could guess. Who I picked as my my test lab by some of the names. But what I'm looking for is to be able to apply for the job online. All right. Once I do that, I'm coming down here and I'm looking down at the bottom that says, please upload your resume. So in this particular case, I'm able to click on that, pick my file, which has my little bit of my Trojan horse in it, and I can then send it up and get it past your firewall onto the local machine. All right, and let's do that now. Bear with me 1 second. Let me light the boxes up. Okay.
So as Chris is doing this, and this is where usually Chris and I tag team this a little bit. When we're doing this in person, we are typically have two systems. It's pretty easy. You can see the one he was presenting on, and then we have the hacker box, and then also the Windows 10 device that is being hacked. In this case, we had to virtualize everything, of course, because we're not live anymore. So it's a little bit different on this side. So what you're seeing here is the hacker box that is starting up and getting going, and Chris is doing that. And then Chris, if you'll just click on the other one real quick, the Windows 10 box, and see this is the employee that's being hacked. And so we're just simulating two different boxes here so that you can see it very well. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Mike. All right. So on this particular side, this is just Kali Linux. This is a completely free download that you can go out and download. You can get it pretty much from anywhere. And I could put it on one of the Raspberry Pis that we talked about earlier. And that's typically how I would do that when the demo. But obviously in this case, we have it kind of slimmed down. On the other side is just a Windows 10 machine, nice, basic, vanilla, nothing extra or anything like that. This is Kevin's box, our little friend. Kevin will be making an appearance later, but this is his box. He works in HR, and he receives the resumes. So what we're going to do on this side, as you can see, I started up the console for the exploit. So let's prepare our side here. All right. All right. So now basically the attacker box or the hacker box is sitting here waiting. It says, okay, I'm waiting, I'm alive, I'm waiting to hear from people. So let's double check that. Sure enough, there he is. He is sitting there waiting. So now we'll go back over to Pinky's machine and we're gonna go in, and here is the file that he would have gotten. All right, I'm gonna open it up. And there's the file. There's the email. It says, hey, trustworthy technician, I'm sure glad I want to be here. Here's the file. Here is the my resume that I would have attached. All right, we're going to open it up. Standard Word. Now, one thing you'll notice is that this looks pretty darn convincing. It's just a straight copy and paste, cutting some of the images out. And what it's doing is it's actually telling me that I need to turn the security features off. Now, I know what you're saying. My people won't do that. There's always one person out there that will do it. Why? Because this is their job. And they feel that if they don't do this, they're not doing their job. Because if your job is to read resumes and you're not reading resumes, then you're not doing your job. So in this particular case, they turn the editing off and then they enable the content. So, and then all of a sudden they get this error message, incorrect word version, cannot unprotect this document. They click OK and it closes out. Now, one thing that you might think about was like, well, Chris, that's really not going to happen. Well, out in the wild where we're working from different locations, what happens if you come across a machine where the user turns the security pieces off and you're trying to go through an an Office upgrade, which may have happened a couple weeks ago, and they think, oh, well, maybe there's something wrong with my Outlook. Word. Now I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to carry it over to someone else and plug it into their machine. So now instead of one machine, I potentially have two machines. Again, remember what I had said earlier. Your team has to be right every time. A hacker only has to be right one time. So with that being said, we'll go right back over to our hacker's box. And as you can see, it's now connected. And there's my session. And now I'm starting to interact with that box behind the scenes, which they can't see it. There's nothing coming up on the screen or anything like that. All right, so first things first here, come over here. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send a registry key so that way I can fully gain control of the machine, which it's done. So to prove that, let's do this. Let's take a screenshot of the desktop. And there's the desktop. Now, on one hand, you may go, okay, Chris, well, you're trying to pull something for this seminar. So let's come over here, back over to the desktop. And let's open it up. Let's see what Kevin has for pictures. Documents. Let's look at his good buddy Roger here. Roger had a little bit too much, and he's got a few marks on him. So let's see. And as you can see, now I took a screenshot of that screen. What I could do if I wanted to, I could take a scheduled task. I could build a scheduled task that just sits there in snapshots all day long. So if you had a teller or something like that, I could gain control over it and just sit there and watch, and hopefully I could see a password go by. Maybe I can see account numbers, things like that. The other thing that I can do now too is I can look at the documents on the PC. If this machine was on the network with, let's say, an M drive, S drive, or something like that to your core business files and documents and things like that, I could then traverse over to that network drive, no problem, and connect, as long as the user that I connected to had some rights to it. If they didn't have rights to it, then I could still try to surf through and find out what's going on. The other thing that we can do is, so yeah, I did a directory tree. Now what I can do is I can come back and I can actually download a file from their system. And there's a couple of Kevin's buddies right there. Got those two pictures. The next one is, what I can do is then I can turn around and I can upload a file back the other direction. So now what we can do is come back over here, get our buddy off the screen. And as you can see, I've put an employee list right here. So we'll come back to that. The other thing we can do with it, since I have control, now I can start a keylogger. And if you don't know what a keylogger is, anything that I type on the screen, it gathers it and puts it in what's called ANSI characters, and I'll show you that. So I can come over here. Let's open up Notepad. An example. All right, so there's some examples there of some stuff that I've typed. And if you notice, I misspelled and retyped some things on the screen. With the keylogger, I can then turn around, dump the information out. And as you notice here, there's where I type. You can see where I hit the right shift, left shift, CRs for return. You can see where I put the Lance's information. You can see where I mistyped. You can see where I backspaced, the whole thing. Where this comes into play is if, let's say, I took over a network administrator's system, and I was sitting here pulling information and keylogging off of it, or even screenshotting, I could come back and find out what your passwords are to your network switches. And then now I can go in and start making changes behind the scenes. Maybe I want to do a port mirror and gather data as your internet traffic goes by, things like that, which you can do that with a Raspberry Pi. That's very close. You can have this thing do as a port sniffer and do that as well. Okay. So now let's go back over to the system. Let's close this out here. And remember the file that we uploaded? Now what we find a lot of times is users sometimes won't notice what this symbol. All they know is that this is the employee list, I'm supposed to go into it. And they click on it and boom, now they got ransomware on their system. You know, and it looks pretty, they traditionally look pretty close to this, and now the system is completely locked up for one reason or another. Now they want bitcoins, and or now they want you to try, you're basically stuck until either you do restores on your last known good restore, or you pay them if you have a policy to pay them. Some companies don't pay, and then they just do a restore, which goes right back to your DR process, making sure that you're doing test restores as you go along. So with that being said, we'll do one last thing here. The other thing that we can do is, so we've uploaded files, we've downloaded files with them, we've run an exploit against them. Now what I can do is, you know how whenever you go to the shows and you get swag, and they always give you the little webcam that blocks for your laptop. the other thing that I can do is I can see his webcam, and I can do a live stream on whatever he's doing. And let's see what he's doing. All right, let's go over here to the file. Let's see if he's up. May have to move the camera for you. So there he is. He's got his shameless plug. Is he coming up to see us? He may. But I can show you, he is a lot. This is a live shot of our little friend. There he is. So that is him. So if you were in a meeting, maybe you brought your laptop in, I could do a live streaming without you knowing about that. So let's go back over here. Close this out. Close this out. All right, now another thing is you're like, okay, Chris, did you go to a class? How did you learn how to do this? Can anybody learn how to do this stuff? And the answer is you can easily type help. And the help command inside the tools that I downloaded off of Kali Linux will show you exactly to do exactly what I did, which becomes very, very scary, where you go back to your script kiddies and so on and so forth, is that with a little practice, you can learn how to do this. You can learn how to do this and connect into systems. So let's go back over to the presentation. All right, and the other thing I'll show you too is that you can also go to Google. You can type it in. You can learn. You can watch a video on how to do a denial of service attack against someone. This is just an example. I just typed in hacking tools go, and this is everything that came up. Everything on the right is everything that came up on YouTube, and there's even more pieces out there too, and it's all for free. And again, if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So those are some things to really, really watch out for. So here at Reliable IT, we invest in five layers of defense. So it's not really 5 layers, it's 5 layers with sub layers. It's almost like a big onion, so it's multiple pieces in there. But the first layer of defense, you've got to have a good spam filtering with AV. You got to have antivirus. You got to do training. Training right now is so inexpensive, especially for security awareness, and there's no reason why you should not be doing it. What we see a lot of customers do is they take the security awareness training and they wrap it into their performance review for their employees to say, hey, did you take these 4 or 5 trainings? What was your score? You got to get XYZ score. So that's kind of a way to keep it together. The other one is identity management, 2-factor authentication. That is so huge. I know from examiners and auditors, if you are even thinking of going Office 365, you've got to have 2-factor authentication in there. If you don't, you need to get a project together and get it turned on. The other one is on-site backup. You got to have backups of your system, and you got to test them, and you got to test them within your disaster recovery plan. Because an example I had one of my customers. This was, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. All the tornadoes that came through Alabama, Mississippi, basically took my whole data center down to the foundation, and it was gone. So we had to basically bring backups from another location that we had on site to bring them up. So you got to just make sure that you always have it tested and you always have what you need. The other one too, make sure on the second layer, make sure that you've got your backups, that it's ransomware proof. Making sure that the accounts that you have, that you don't just have shares open where you're storing backups. You have those things locked down. In some cases, you can even put your backups on a separate subnet if you want to, isolate it away from everything if you want. You can do that as well too. Also to antivirus. So antivirus is taking a different approach now. So now you're starting to see where a traditional Symantec or McAfee or what have you has a definition-based protection. Now you're moving to more of an artificial intelligence tool. As an example, Cylance is one off the top of my head. So Cylance, basically, it's not necessarily looking at definitions, but it's looking at behavior. Monitoring is a big one. Patch management is another big one. Layers of the other piece is SIM. That's another big one to do as well too. Watching those threat protections. Managed firewalls, basically having people and or systems pulling that information out so that way you can see when people are attacking, especially denial of service attack. Yearly security risk assessments, making sure that you do those pen tests every year is very, very important. Even if you want to take it as far as you want to do red team, blue team, which is attackers and internal IT battling against each other. You can do that as well too to test your processes. And then the last one is business continuity. What do you do if something happens? And even taking it to another final step, which is even your vendors. Because if you have a huge storm and you go, oh, well, in my form here, I'm just going to call and order another part and get here. Well, you get it to the office. Well, you got to think about this. FedEx may be down, UPS may be down, everyone may be down. So you may be driving to the vendor to get the part and drive it back to your office. So those are just some things to think about. These are the 5 layers of defense that we go by, and it's a lot of stuff to think about too. So,
Perfect.
any questions?
No, there was actually no questions on this one. So sorry, Chris, you must have done a fantastic job of educating everybody during this process. So if you'll hand back the controls to me, I'll hand it over to Lance.
That sounds great. Thanks, Chris. Great job. I'd love to say that was a great presentation, but mostly it's a scary presentation for me. I'm picturing what my 14-year-old is doing up in the bedroom right now. It's a little scary. So great job. So really, question for the audience now. According to Chris, if you discover that you've been hacked, what is the very first thing that you should do? And then there's a second bonus question, which is the fun question. The real star of Chris's presentation has 4 legs. What was his name? All right, that's 2. We are ready. We're pretty close to on time. We're doing a good job today. Our next presenter, we're going to bring Lindy back in. Lindy, are you back with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, well, you did such a great job earlier. We're going to give you the floor one more time. Her second topic is the logistics of SharePoint and OneDrive. Lindy, go for it.
Okay, so let me make sure I was given permission. Let me share my screen. I'm going to hop to this here, share. Okay, and I'm going to enlarge.
And Lindy, I'll tell you that I'll let you know when it looks good.
Right.
And
That
good. Thank you.
awesome. All right, so let's talk about something that sounds kind of boring, but it's really not. It's the logistics of SharePoint and OneDrive. So these 2 things you're probably very, very, very familiar with. You probably hate SharePoint. You probably see OneDrive a lot. Maybe you use it, but they're really amazing, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay, first let's start with a top-level overview of Office 365. So as you can see right here, see down here, that's OneDrive, and here's your buddy SharePoint, and then here's all the familiar players in the club, right? Like Excel and Outlook. So this is all now called Office 365. No more, not having that document upload to the cloud. So now we have Office 365, very fancy. Well, all of a sudden we got Microsoft 365 at like 8 Office 365. And there's a lot of confusion about, well, which one is it? What do I call it? So you can just call it, 365. That's one of the most popular ones, but Microsoft renamed it because they wanted Office 365 to be thought of more than just those standard apps, because they also have Azure. They have all these other premium services that you'll probably never use, but are very expensive and lucrative. So Microsoft wanted to rebrand that. But Office 365, you're probably very familiar with. Okay, so let's talk about SharePoint as one of the Office 365 now cloud. They call the one that you probably use most often is called SharePoint Online. and it comes with your Office 365 subscription. So yes, it is free. And if you're not using it, it's a dang shame, because it's probably the best internet platform that you have available for your bank. So this is what it looks like when you get to the splash page. It's kind of intimidating, honestly, if you're not familiar with it. It's got a nice modern look. They call it, this is the new modern look. But, you know, at first people might be like, oh, this is so busy. It's so messy. I don't like it. But it's actually quite well organized. At the front here, you have all your team sites, all your SharePoint sites. You can favorite them. You can create a site. You can create new posts. There's so many permission functionality in there. So you can really have expert level of document control, record control, down to such a tiny granular level. So if you're worried about data control, SharePoint is an excellent solution for controlling data within your bank. Okay, so yeah, I was talking about that modern look and feel. So a lot of people like to customize it. They like to put their bank colors on it. They like to make it look very fashionable. The modern look does have certain restrictions, so it makes it a little difficult to make it exactly look like somebody's website, let's say. But you know, for consistency purposes, it's quite acceptable. I think you'll get used to using it, and it is clean. It really does have a nice clean look. You can do all kinds of things with SharePoint, so I don't want you to think of it as just like this is very simple internet. No, since everything's connected, you know, remember when we were talking about Power BI and how all these applications are connected? SharePoint is one of those applications that's connected to Power BI, and SharePoint also connects to all these other applications, including your Outlook and doing things like calendars and sharing those calendars. But this is where the problem starts, right? You set up a SharePoint and people start that. You can even make it look really nice. Like over here, you got, oh, engineering, finance, legal, operations. Oh, that's nice. And then you got all these cool little sub ones. And then you see documents. And then look at this. You got pricing guidelines. You got expansion, somebody's resume. So all of a sudden it becomes a data dump, right? And then nobody goes there. Nobody wants to use it because it's so hard to find anything, especially if it was set, like, look how nice that's set up. But still, somebody created a documents or left the documents folder and everybody just came in and started using it. You can prevent that from happening. With successful organized deployment, you can prevent that mess from happening. Okay, so the way you do it, and it's very important, is you have to lay out a plan. You have to know what site you're building. What is the purpose of it? That is such a missed opportunity. People just go and create SharePoints. They try to make them look like websites and they move on, and it becomes a folder data dump. So this is the biggest question you need to ask yourself. Who is my audience and why am I building it? Okay, so they have templates that you can use to make team sites, SharePoint sites, communication sites, hub sites, Microsoft Teams sites. There's a lot more that goes into it, but I just want you to understand that, you know, on the big pictures of things, if you start off on the right foot, you can really make your intranet something that people use every single day, that will better use your resources and improve efficiency and protect your data. Okay, here's another one that you're probably familiar with, MS Project. They have Excel, they have Word, all these things can be integrated in there. You don't lose functionality, and you can open these files from SharePoint onto your local computer and see the application and like the nice familiar interface of Excel, and, you know, have all your macros and commands and everything. So don't feel like you're restricted when you're working with these advanced applications like Microsoft Project and think, oh, well, I don't like this interface. I don't want to work in this. I don't like it. Well, just download it to or sync it to your local, work there. It will sync back to the SharePoint and you're nice and good. So at the end of the day, SharePoint and OneDrive, they're clouds. They're on the cloud. So when people think about clouds, they think about data security, which is true because you're backing up data to, away from your local. So if you have a server crash or something, your data is protected. Now, there's other benefits though of the cloud, and that is version history. So if somebody comes in and messes with your documents and you're like, oh my gosh, they deleted everything, that's awful. Well, now you can go back in time, reverse it, get rid of their changes, and see your original untampered with document. You can co-author, and you can track who's touching your document, what time they touched it, and what they did to it. So co-authoring is a very powerful feature in SharePoint. External sharing. So I've heard it called data centers, data warehouses, external sites. So there's all these ways you can call it, but basically you can set SharePoint up and share it with external users to the degree that you think is appropriate. Maybe you just want to share one folder with a certain external user for whatever reason. Maybe it's the title company or something, and you're doing mortgages. You can do that. You can put that information on the cloud in SharePoint in a folder within SharePoint, and then give them the link, and only they will be able to access it and work in there, and you can see what they're doing to it. It's great. Another wonderful thing is document level permissions. Maybe you only want them to read it and not touch it. They can't edit it. Don't do anything to my document, right? You have that ability to do that as well. You can also make sure that they only see certain documents. Maybe you don't want them to see everything. Another wonderful feature about having a cloud is mobile. How often are you on your phone? Well, you can be in a meeting and somebody asks you a question and you can be like, well, that's on our department SharePoint, and you didn't look hard enough. And you go on your phone, you click it, open it, and hold up your phone and say, see, you didn't try, and you're saying I didn't give it to you. Well, it's right here and I told you it was right there. So that's another benefit. And then you can sync offline editing. We've had some issues with people syncing files from their desktop. It's very common that people want to put, whether it's OneDrive or SharePoint, they like to put things on their local computer and save them there, and then try to share them with other people. And then they like to have some on SharePoint, some on their local, and it gets really messy. And there have been known syncing issues. So I don't recommend that. I recommend that if you're going to use a document from SharePoint, that you can still open it on your local drive, but don't save it to your desktop and then try to share the link with other people. It gets really messy. So that's some of the benefits of cloud storage. So now, another really big question that I get is, what's the difference? What is the difference? Well, Microsoft had a vision for OneDrive and a vision for SharePoint. And it's like the we, me kind of, if you've ever heard of that. Have you ever heard? We, me. Okay. So the me in this is you. And that's what OneDrive is for. It is for one person to create documents, to maybe share with 3 people, and that's it. So just think of it as your personal cloud. It's your personal cloud that you can put documents on and share with a select number of people. SharePoint is much bigger. It's larger scale. You can publish documents to, your entire organization. Multiple people can come in there and work. Fantastic, right? So me, the OneDrive is the me, and the SharePoint is the we. Okay. So are they the same? That is the second largest question I get, because people often get confused, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I'll show you on the next slide. But, here's the answers I get. 1, SharePoint is the front end, whereas OneDrive is the cloud. It's the back end. It holds everything. And then somebody else will tell me, okay, no. OneDrive is the front end, and it's actually SharePoint that's the back end. So, it gets so confusing. And you might ask, like, well, which is it? And the answer is both, because they're both the cloud. That's the straight answer. They're both the cloud, and in the very far background, there's Azure and all these other like mechanics that you'll never need to see or care about. But the answer is both. And you'll also notice that, okay, so SharePoint has libraries that that they call libraries, right? But it's got a very familiar interface with OneDrive. So if you've ever opened OneDrive on the web, that's exactly very similar interface as this SharePoint, right? It's got the documents and folders that you created on the left side. It's got all your files underneath. That it replicates SharePoint so closely. So no wonder why people get confused. In fact, here's an example. This is mine. And you can see here, I'm in my OneDrive right now. In that picture, that's my OneDrive. But look at the link. It says SharePoint. So it gets so confused. You're like, what's going on, Microsoft? Where am I? So you just need to remember that it is all part of the cloud. They all interact with each other. Sometimes you might see OneDrive in the URL. Sometimes you might see Teams. Sometimes you might see SharePoint. End of the day, they're just Office 365 Cloud, Microsoft 365 Cloud, whatever you want to call it, 365 Cloud. Okay. So which is right for me? Now, just try to remember, if you're using about less than 10 users, like if you want to share with less than 10 users, OneDrive's perfectly acceptable. You can go ahead and save stuff to your OneDrive, send your pals an access link, and they can go into the particular folder or file that you want to share with them, and they can access it that way. This is for drafts, projects, small projects, maybe like formalizing some things. But once you want to author it and publish it to your company, share with the world, then you really want to go to SharePoint and then let your company know this is available for whatever appropriate site. Maybe you're putting your policies and procedures on there. Maybe you're doing metrics. You can actually embed other applications within SharePoint. So if you have, for example, Power BI or Power App, and you want to publish them on the splash page, let's say, people can go in there and play with the little levers and stuff. So there's all kinds of integration options. It really is a team resource. Okay, so that brings up another question. Now, we brought up Teams. Now, what should I use? SharePoint, OneDrive? Everybody's starting to use Teams, so I don't know which one's right for me. Well, the answer is, since they're on the cloud, the answer is all, okay? But you can integrate them. You can make them all work together the way that, without any issue if you do it with their intended purpose. So let's talk a little bit about Teams, because I think Teams is really important. You've probably seen it. This is an example of somebody's Teams. A lot of people get overwhelmed when they first open Teams. They don't like that. It doesn't look like the old Skype. If you've ever used Skype before for business that Microsoft had, and you can chat with your pals and other departments and stuff like that. Yes, I understand there's apprehension at first, but if you get used to the Teams interface, it is one of the most powerful Microsoft applications available to you. You must learn this, and it really doesn't take too terribly long. And once you learn it, it will be probably the application that you spend 90% of your time in, because they're integrating all the other applications with it. I guarantee you within the next, 5 years, I bet that Microsoft will have made this the platform, the go-to that is essential for everybody to use, because it is integrating everything. You get chats, you get your meetings, you get third-party connectors. So even if you don't use Microsoft applications all the time, you can pull in those third-party ones. It's crazy how quickly they're expanding this and making it possible. So when you have SharePoint, you can embed that in Teams. So your SharePoint that nobody wants to open their internet browser to go to, you can add it right here by pressing this little plus thing and selecting SharePoint from the dropdown, and then select the SharePoint site you want to embed in here. You got to have access to that particular SharePoint, but once you add it, you'll have a little tab up here that has your SharePoint site. You could have all of your employees have access to that SharePoint site. There's no excuse that they can't go use it, because it is right there. So it's very, very pliable and it's very integrated. And once you have it set up, like I said, it's fantastic. See, here's an example. They have the news, the home, everything. You just select what you want. You can put in one page, multiple pages, the entire site. So that's pretty much it. I know that I gave you a lot of information right now, but overall, I kind of wanted just to imprint into your minds that it's a cloud. It's cloud, and that's all that really matters when it comes to when you're working with your documents, your records, your files, and things like that. The way that it works in the background is Azure, and the rest of it is the power of these applications that you can harness. So I'm going to stop sharing and take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Lindy. That was great, as always. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Aaron, do you want to start us off with a question?
Oh, sure. So let's see here. Does this have to take the place of all the bank servers where we store all our files today?
Can you repeat that, Aaron?
Does this take the place of all our bank servers where we store all our files today? In other words, do we have to have a file server anymore?
You don't necessarily have to have a file server, and there are limitations on SharePoint about how much space. Sometimes you have to buy more space if you get really, really big. But I mean, technically, yes, you could put all your files and all your things on there. I don't recommend that because I always think you should have two places that you store your data. You know, Microsoft is very safe. They have a way of taking documents and piecing them. They take them apart when they go put them on the cloud so that, you know, you're like encrypting your documents when they go to the cloud, and then when you bring them back down, it reassembles them. So you do have a lot of security there, but you know, I'm kind of paranoid after watching people like Chris and stuff, and I want to make sure that I have two places for my data all the time.
I had another question that came up as well, Lindy, is Teams is getting to be very popular, and heard that it was a phone system as well. Do you have any, I know we didn't talk about that specifically, but do you have any information on that by chance?
Yeah, so if you recall, if you had Skype for Business, you absolutely, it's VoIP. You could call your coworkers over Skype, and they even had like a webcam interface and everything. So they took that technology and they put it within Teams. So yes, you can use it that way. You can have your phone set up to accept that. It's all based on VoIP, voice over internet protocol. So yes, absolutely.
Aaron, any additional comments on that specific? I mean, what you've seen out there?
Yeah, certainly. As far as a phone system, we do have clients in our IT ourselves. That Teams is the phone system we use, and we have many clients that use it. And it's a good phone system. I mean, like any system, you have to really look at your requirements to make sure it's a fit for you, because it hasn't been a fit for all our clients. But it's certainly one I would consider if you're moving to Teams or considering it. I would add to what Lindy presented is the challenge that I think some of our clients go through when we first sit down, when we move them to Microsoft 365, is where to get started. Lindy alluded to, you know, people quickly start dumping documents into SharePoint, right? And using it as just a document dump is a bad use of it, but very natural. People want to do that. And so the way to go about it is to do a discovery. So with SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, the best process to go through is educate yourself on it at a high level, which is part of what we're doing today. We also have a program that we're certified by Microsoft to do, and that is go to your bank or do it online, set up demo accounts, and really kind of get into details for like a half-day session with your organization. In fact, Michael Clemens and Chris Peterson, who presented earlier, are certified to do that. And then from there, what we can do is start with a discovery statement of work. And so, because to do this correctly, it's where you're going to spend your money, regardless of where you get that consulting or if you hire someone, is going to be in that upfront discovery and planning stage. The actual execution to set up some of the sites and team sites that Lindy showed is actually the easy part, right? There's lots of people in the marketplace that can do that, and it's quicker. It's the proper planning, working with various stakeholders in your organization and doing interviews, learning what you're doing today and how it can be improved upon in order to come up with that design before you go there. And that's really where, if you're going to spend some money on SharePoint, is really at that upfront discovery piece. Because once that's done, the rest of it is really not that hard.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. Lance, back to you. And I think, Lindy, you passed the baton back to me, correct?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
All right. Very good, Lindy. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. One question for the audience. Lindy hit it and Aaron kind of reemphasized it. Before I get started, what is the first question I should be asking myself and my team before building out my SharePoint or OneDrive? So, all right, fantastic. We are at about quarter till. We've got about a 15-minute break. We're going to start at straight up on the hour for our last presentation. And we saved the best for last. Just ask our next speaker. She'll attest to that. Joking, of course, Tracy. We're all looking forward to hearing from Tracy from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Should be a very entertaining talk, very informational as well. So everybody take a quick break, grab a bite to eat. You should be getting your DoorDash from Taya here anytime. So go ahead and order some lunch and take a brief break, and we'll see you straight up at the hour. Thanks. All right, as we get prepared to get back underway, Tracy, are you with us?
I am.
Fantastic.
Hi there.
Hi. I know you'll be worth the wait. Thank you for being patient all morning. Appreciate it. Mike, are you there with us? Mr. McWilliams.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
All right, fabulous. All right, Mike, are you ready with Tracy's presentation?
Yes, sir, I am ready.
All right, well, let's get rolling. So Tracy Dowd is with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Agent Dowd is assigned to the high-tech crimes unit within the Colorado Bureau of Investigation prior to her 10-year law enforcement career. Tracy was a real estate investor, mortgage broker, and provided hard money loans to real estate investors throughout Colorado. Tracy is a certified fraud examiner and has a degree in accounting and utilizes this background to combat cyber and complex financial crime. It's great to have you with us today, Tracy. I'm looking forward to what you have.
Thanks, you guys. Good to be here. Thank you for the invite. And yeah, it's actually interesting. Right now, I've been in Colorado Bureau of Investigation for about 4 years, and the high-tech crime unit, it's kind of an interesting unit. We work a lot with victims of identity theft, business identity theft, fraud, wire fraud, but we also tackle a lot of financial crime cases that really will, be included in several different Colorado jurisdictions, so they get referred to us in that way. So we call ourselves a high-tech crime because it seems like right now, everything that we do with financial cases has some sort of fraud element to it. So I like to think that my position anyway is more like a cyber fraud investigator. And so that's primarily what I do. So in our unit, we do have folks that are on the cyber task force with different agencies and such. And they're more like the folks that handle the network intrusions and have some of the skills and skill sets of some of the guys that have been on here today. That is not my skill set. So I'm just a geek. I just like spreadsheets, and I'm a cop. So if I make references to cyber stuff, it really, I think you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. I want to relate to you what I'm seeing on the fraud side from law enforcement. A lot of it will be what relates to you personally, but the majority of it, I'm going to try and focus on what you're going to see in business and different entities, because we really do work a lot with a lot of outreach and training with law enforcement agencies, businesses, title companies, organizations, and so to kind of let them know the role that law enforcement can play with some of these things. So, so go ahead. So you've heard a lot of these same kind of terms today, and a lot of them you're familiar with, I'm sure. Really, these are just the tools that they use. Bad guys will use, and fraudsters will use to get to you or get to your business for whatever their nefarious purposes, right? Like phishing, ransomware. We've heard a lot of references today. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is about romance scams too, and the strange role they play for bad guys, and what I like to call the international money mule network. Work from home scams, things that you wouldn't think about, but then business identity theft and what you can do to protect yourself from that. And I realize and recognize that today we have other people here from outside the state of Colorado. So I'm going to make references to Colorado and just understand, and I'll make, to really look at the Secretary of States within your state and to see what their requirements are. But I'm going to allude to what ours are here, and hopefully it'll still help you. We're going to talk about business email compromise, BEC, and how that really affects a lot of what I do right now in my job. We'll talk about how different diversion schemes, again, we talked a lot about vendors, and you talked about that today with different folks. And what I see on my end is how easily some of the information that some of these people, whether it's payroll clerks in your businesses or folks that handle the vendors, how easily they can be compromised. And I'll talk to you about what we see on our side, how that happens. So, and we'll talk about W-2s and those kind of schemes that we see that are more seasonal. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So some of the tactics that they use to do this, again, familiar terms, the social engineering, all the open source data that we find. And identity theft, let's talk a little bit about individual or personal ID theft. Because I want to put this in perspective. We have a lot of folks and a lot of crime that happens on the internet, people we can't, in my unit, for example, I know that I'm not going to be able to find, and they're most likely out of the state of Colorado. But when it comes to a lot of personal identity theft, I just wanted to bring this up and how important it is, and how this kind of works and what we see. So we have a lot of identity theft rings, which have been around forever, right? And they share a lot of information. A lot of these organizations are still tied to a lot of organized crime, drug-related, a lot of methamphetamine rings, right? And they share information and how they do things. So for example, you all see the, like if you have a ring alert from something that happened last night, and someone reports that somebody broke into their car, but it's okay because they didn't take anything. They just took some paperwork from the glove box or whatever. Well, that's exactly what they wanted, right? They're identity thieves. These guys are going through your cars. They're still going through the dumpsters. They're looking for mail. They're looking for checks. They're looking for account numbers. They're looking for information on you. So these rings that happen, what they do is they take that information, whether it's just massive amounts of mail sometimes we find, and they go through it and they pull profiles on these individual peoples off the dark web, and they create credit card accounts or ID theft for whatever they want. Usually it's credit cards, and that's what we see. So I just want to kind of put that in perspective of something that happens on an identity theft level for an individual, that those are kind of the things that we're seeing that are not online, but it's still so common, and which is why check fraud is still so common. So the data collections, we talk about from past breaches, a lot of our information, as we know, is out there. But I also want to make it important, if this hasn't been made clear earlier, the sharing of information with all the bad guys is so prevalent. They share information, you can purchase information, obviously. But so all the breaches and information and passwords and emails is all being collected, and it's cross-referenced. And so if you look at it that way, it makes it really important that you shouldn't use the same password that you used 10 years ago because it's sitting in some bad guy's spreadsheet that he downloaded off the internet, right? So, anyway, so we'll talk about phishing a little bit, but mostly we're going to talk about how that can affect your business, the targeted phishing, and how that can work for your employees and you. So again, when you look at all the data breaches, and I know there's a lot of people on here that have a lot more information than I do, but from what I've seen, a lot of the breaches that happen, whether it's the big consumers or customers, happen through phishing. Could they do something more technical? Yeah, but a lot of times they don't have to. A lot of the stuff that these bad guys are doing are like literally the path of least resistance sometimes, because human behavior is pretty predictable. So that's why it works so well. So we talked about the organized crime function locally with personal identity theft, but essentially when you take away the risk of the old school ways of robbing a bank, and you look at how easier it is and the gain, I think the average successful bank robber, I think, what is it, $6,000 or something like that, that they may get from a successful bank robbery. It's the average, I think. But you could send a business or compromise somebody's email, this title company, for example, and I've compromised the buyer's funds of $150,000, and you are physically okay. No one is chasing after you. So definitely the criminals, and even on the lower level local side, have understood that this is really the way to go. Yeah, next slide. So this is just an example. I referenced the dumpster diving. Obviously, one of the things I want to talk about, I know we have some bankers here, so when we work a lot with a lot of local working groups, and one of them is we work on with the skimmer working group. And what amazes me right now is the ability with all the 3D printing and whatnot, the technology that's available. And the skimmers now we find like this big, right? And they're Bluetooth, and they're at a gas station pump, and you're sitting there now, and the guy in the car next to you is sitting on his laptop collecting all of your credit card information. That's where we're at right now, and it's pretty amazing the way that the technology sort of, for skimmers at least, starts in California or Florida, I'm sorry, and kind of moves its way west. So it's pretty fascinating in the technology that we have. But even with all of that, we still have seen a huge uptick in mail and credit card and check fraud. So as you guys probably know. So So how is your business, and I mean, whether you are a smaller organization, a financial institution, whatever industry you're in, I'll use some examples. But even right now, we talk a lot about everybody working at home and they're on their VPNs. You know, we at CBI, we have done a pretty good job of trying to develop relationships with the title and real estate company, especially a few years ago when wire fraud became so incredibly prevalent. And what we have realized is how important building those relationships is. Real estate agents, for example, and folks that work for that industry at the time were really susceptible and vulnerable because everybody works off of one laptop for their business and personal use. Even more common now, I'm sure, even though we probably all do it and we all know we shouldn't do it, it happens. And I'm going to give you an example of why that becomes so important. So one case, for example, we've got a gentleman who was up in northern Colorado, and he's on Craigslist, and he purchased a car. It was a Cadillac Escalade in Arkansas for 30 grand. So he sent the funds, I think it was a wire, and he didn't get the vehicle, so he brought it to the local police department. And what you'll know is a lot of times we would take these fraud cases to the local PD, especially a wire fraud, like when I was on patrol. You know, and I don't know if anybody's had experience with this, but what ends up happening is they'll take the report, but that'll get sent to investigations because that's going to take more time. Patrol needs to work on other things, right? So investigations will look at that and go, oh, they sent that money out of state. It was a long time has passed. We're probably not going to follow up on that. We're not going to be able to catch a bad guy. CBI has realized that part of the role of law enforcement can actually be to try and get the money back for the victim. So that's kind of a different way of looking at law enforcement. So if you sent the money on a Cadillac Escalade off of Craigslist, you sent the 30 grand, nobody followed up on the wire, you brought it to a state level, able to follow up on it, and this is what ended up happening to this poor gentleman. So there's a Baltic States ring that's out there that essentially spoofs these Craigslist ads for these vehicles, has people click on them, follows them to either another link or engages in email conversation, does have them click on something that installs malware on their computer. So the 30 grand is already gone, but the scheme is not finished. There's more. You know, wait, there's more. Because any opportunity that you give these guys, they're going to take. They're not just going to walk away necessarily if there is more opportunities for them to get more money or more data or whatever it might be. So then, because the bad guys were able to compromise this guy's email, they were able to get his credentials for his financial and retirement accounts, of which they drained. And so when we get back to looking at this scheme, it is so common and so prevalent. There's hundreds of victims that fall prevalent to this every day. And it's really important because when I go on Craigslist, or I say Craigslist, but it could be any online marketplace, right? When they direct you or these links, there a lot of times, I saw one where they're like spoofing a tractor, right? So just keep in mind that you might be looking on your lunch break and you're on your computer and you're looking on Craigslist for these harmingly, maybe, not very a tractor or a car, whatever it might be, but understand that what you might be clicking on may bring something that you don't want into your life and into your house. And I don't mean to make everybody nervous about online shopping, but you get the idea. So one of the things to look about, and they talk about the phishing emails, these happen quite often. They're targeted to you. Maybe they have information that you have a Home Depot credit card, so they send you a Home Depot account or something like that. But just to give you an idea of some of these that we've seen that look like legitimate links, but it kind of carry us to a place where they try and grab our credentials. On the ransomware side, I won't go into this too much because I know a lot of this was covered earlier. What I did want to say in the law enforcement side, when we get calls from businesses, by the time that it gets to us, usually they're smaller businesses or large corporations. Some of the things that, of course, we verify that they have gone through their policies and procedures internally. All their IT folks are aware of what's happened and that they are taking procedures and caution, whatever they need to do. And I get asked a lot, should we pay? And so I just wanted to share, we've seen two sides of this, and in my own personal opinion, you really have two sides to look at. A lot of times we have smaller companies that don't have proper backup, or something that has been backed up that's not attached to their network. So essentially it's still compromised. And so that obviously is a problem. Even if you pay the funds or currency available, the thought is, well, okay, and you get access to your information back. What do they leave behind, right? So I won't touch more on that because it was covered earlier, but from a law enforcement perspective, it's just really, we always suggest not to pay the bad guys, but it's easier said than done if you have not prepared ahead of time with proper backup. So in the business email compromise, obviously the BEC, one of the bigger scams that we see coming in on the cyber fraud side, especially with the businesses. So a lot of times, I'll use the title company world, but it could be a lot of manufacturing companies. When they receive targeted emails to somebody within the organization that has access to data or money, or both. And so quite frequently, what we see an uptick in are firms such as CPA firms, bookkeeping, payroll clerks. And so they're going to target people and try and compromise people's email that have access to multiple, multiple data or multiple people's emails, something that they want. So it's again a path of least resistance. If I can compromise one person but have access to all this other data, that really makes the most sense. So you see a lot of that, bookkeeping firms, QuickBooks, things that are being targeted in that way. Next slide. So obviously, business email compromise losses nationwide have grown quite a bit since 2013, when we really started tracking what business email compromise was, right? When people's emails get compromised. And I just want to clarify too, because we see two types of what people call us for, or the business email compromise. When someone's email has been compromised, I look at it, I'll call it the hacked, right? Where somebody actually has physical access into your email account, and they're kind of sitting back and they're watching you do your daily activities at your business. And they're waiting for that opportunity, whether it be a closing for a real estate company or whatnot. They are waiting for that opportunity to jump in there to get whatever information they want. But we also get the email, people believe that they've been hacked or there's some sort of breach, but actually their email's only been spoofed. So I just kind of want to differentiate between those two things. And then on here, on this slide, you'll see reference to the FBI's ic3.gov website. And ic3.gov, if you have not heard of it, is the FBI's Internet Crime Reporting website. And that is where you as a victim or your business or people can go on there and in a very simple form online, just kind of lay out what happens. But you have a business, and if you guys have been compromised, or your customer, somebody you know has been compromised or sent money, understand that the FBI has certain guidelines. So you are reporting this to the FBI, but a lot of people believe that they're going to get a call back, and that doesn't always happen. So understand the FBI's guidelines for wire fraud is it has to be within 3 days, over $50,000, and have gone out internationally. So if those requirements are met, you basically, your IC3 receives that information, it gets sent to a field office near you, and hopefully an agent will get back to you in a timely manner. But the problem with that is if you or your victim or somebody you know has sent a wire out, the sense of urgency is really important. So you hit the next slide for me real quick. So I want to talk about a little bit too about if you do, reporting it to local law enforcement is important, but understanding that when your business has been compromised, who do you really call? You work out with your IT folks, but if you have victims of wire fraud at CBI, at the Colorado state level, you can call us. I'll show you how you can reach out to us on our website, because we act immediately. We don't worry about necessarily capturing a bad guy and putting him in handcuffs, which is very sad because it's very fun for me. But now it's more about getting the money back for the victims and freezing funds in banks and working with the fraud departments at different banks to try and get that money back. That's really what we do. So we really pride ourselves in having a lot of amazing relationships with bankers so that we know who to call if a fraud or something's going on. So pretty much everybody's affected in this, right? It doesn't matter if you are a public or private sector, your email can be compromised because of what you do, your title at your job, your CEO, whatever that means. Anybody who has access to information can essentially be a target for whatever purpose they want to get your information. So, if you hit the next slide, I wanted to, this is just a couple slides talking about email spoofing. If you can go to the next one, Mike, and then, so just really quick, because my predecessor, my boss actually put this in here, but so if you can see right there what the spoofing emails might look like, and if you go to the next slide, it shows just, varying degrees of how easy this actually is and how people really do become victim to this, because you're going through your everyday work and you're not paying attention to the fact that this is not your boss emailing you, asking you to send all the W-2s to this person, right? So I just wanted to kind of point that out. And again, if you hover over the header on an email, it'll say what the email actually is versus the display name. So this is the things that people fall for all the time. So on the state level, in any kind of business and bank, if you have vendors or folks that are set up for billing purposes, more than likely, almost everyone I've seen, they have a process in place. So if you have a vendor that says, hey, send all my payments to this particular bank account, and here's the form when you set up your agreements, and that looks great. And then if there's a change that needs to be made to those bank details, they usually have a form that they fill out. So if an email is compromised or something like that to a clerk responsible for that type of thing, or simply a vendor can email one of these folks and say, hey, I need to change my payment information for you to send this to. And the clerk will say, great, I need you to fill out this form with the new bank account information and send it back to me. And the bad guys are like, cool. So they actually fill out the form, they'll fax it back, they'll email it back, whatever they want them to do. And then the vendor will start sending these payments to this bad guy's info. And sometimes months will go by before anybody realizes what happened. And if you go to the next slide, the same thing can happen with payroll, because payroll information, ACH fraud, anything where there's a policy set up and the policies are in place, and the person that is the clerk that's taking the information, or the HR person who's told, yeah, if people want to change the direct deposit information, these steps have to occur. And he or she is doing their due diligence, and they're sending the form out, they're receiving the information, and they're putting it in the file, and they're updating their system. That's what they're told to do. And the bad guys know this. So just keep in mind that sometimes it's kind of like old school's the new school. And so pick up the phone, and maybe if you don't already do that as a policy, have your folks pick up the phone when there's a bank detail change of any kind, and saying, hey, I just want to verify that you authorized this. And that can save everybody a heartache. And we say that with I know the title and real estate industry, they know that as well, but just something to think about. In the state of Colorado and other states, think about all the transparency that's out there. The vendors in the state of Colorado, for example, are online. So how easy is it to target one of those and pretend to be one of those guys, right? So you can just see that we kind of put all this information out there. It just takes somebody to want to create that opportunity and to perpetrate that fraud. So when it comes to the business email compromise, I have yet to see a wire fraud, ACH fraud, or some sort of wire come through that has not involved a romance scam victim. And it's truly very, it's so prevalent that it's so huge. We probably have all met somebody in our lives or heard about how this works, right? People meet online, they start developing a relationship pretty quickly. And over time, it's like grooming behavior. They start asking them to wire money for different purposes and for whatever that may be. What I also want to have you guys understand that the romance scam is not just isolated to dating sites anymore. We see people being contacted on LinkedIn, and they start talking and things develop and turns into a romance scam. I had one last year, and she lost $150,000, and it takes a lot of convincing on our part, because she talked to him for about a year, right? And she talked to him, they call him the phone, and they create all this whole world where they believe that they are in love with this person, and they get them to send money. when they are out of money, and I mean maybe they've even mortgaged their houses or whatnot, right? Then that's when they have them start sending money or receiving money and forwarding it on and becoming the money mule, or receiving packages and forwarding it on. A lot of times, you guys have probably seen this too on the banking side, where they open up businesses and they do all that. So this is basically the mechanism that folks from outside the countries that are doing these scams start diverting the money and laundering it. That will eventually, when it usually goes out of the country, is with money mules who have been working with the bad guys and talking with them for a really long time. There's a lot of trust built up. Now we can go ahead and jump it overseas or put it in Bitcoin or whatnot. So they play such an important role. Like I said, I have not seen a romance scam victim come into us yet that has not been involved with a business email compromise. So I just want to kind of throw that out there. So this is just some stats that we've seen. We keep track of a lot of the business email compromises that come in, so you can see the amount of money that's tied to this. These are essentially, these are, a lot of it's actually titled real estate businesses related. And one thing I wanted to point out of how important training is, and understanding with your companies, your businesses, whatever you do, whether it's money they're sending out or whether it is data or whatever it is, what is your policies in place? Because you can handle the physical side and the security side, but then we also have, obviously training, but what's going to happen on, how are we going to report this to law enforcement? So it's really important to kind of know that ahead of time. And next slide. One of the things that I want to talk about too is if people think about the relationships that you have with your different networking opportunities that we have these days, if whatever industry you're in, if you can try and find a group that involves fraud or law enforcement, if it's the financial side, I know in Colorado there's a lot of those here, become involved with people who handle financial crime and fraud in your state or in your area. If nothing else, especially these days, become a part of their email list and become a member, because the sharing of information is absolutely invaluable. So if you don't have one in your area, and if it's a small community or whatnot, create one. I have lots of people that have done that, and it's just really, that networking is really important. So you need to know who to contact. You need to find out who law enforcement understands financial crime, understands what's happening with your business and how to handle it. So just something to think about ahead of time, to add that into your policies and the procedures and know what to do. Next slide. You can probably skip to that. Well, I just want to point out on this slide, I mentioned the, being a member of some sort of fraud working group if they exist in your area. And I mentioned on the bottom here, the FBI's website of ic3.gov. And also I want to note that one of the most trusted websites we have, we actually have a victim advocates that work in our unit with business ID theft and ID theft. And they assist people a lot with their credit reporting if they've been a victim of ID theft. But we always direct people to one of the safer websites, which is ftc.gov, because they have an enormous value as far as what you can do with the credit bureaus, who to contact, and the links from the ftc.gov I found to be fairly accurate and secure. So I always direct people there for resources if you need that. So next slide. And this is just an example. If you are in Colorado, sometimes I've helped with people out of Colorado. If you have a fraud opportunity or if you're a victim of fraud, you can go to the website. We've actually set this up. I mentioned the sense of urgency for fraud and wire fraud, things that happen, and how time is so important. And so we have reportwirefraud.com, which is essentially like an email hotline where we will grab your email and your information and start coordinating with the banks to try and get your funds returned as quickly as possible. And the other role that law enforcement can play on these kind of wire frauds or ACH fraud, vendor fraud, the other role that we can play, as you guys probably know, sometimes if a wire is sent, I'll tell you this is what happens. And you guys please feel free to correct me if I am wrong in what I'm saying. Where a wire will get, this is what happens. Let's say somebody sends a wire, a closing company sends a wire, buyer sends a wire to a bank, to Wells Fargo, to Bank of America, or whatever. We get involved, we call the fraud department at the receiving bank, they freeze the funds. But what happens when they freeze the funds a lot of times is then that causes a chain reaction. So In other words, a lot of times they can't do a wire reversal, or they can't automatically send the funds back to the victim's bank. So we have an issue. So this has come into play at times. If there's something happens where the funds are stuck for whatever reason, and they're frozen in an account for an extended period of time, and the victim wants to buy a house and they can't buy their house until they get the 200 grand back or something like that, we actually step in and do a search and seizure warrant, and we go in there, we get a court order to have the bank send the funds in a cashier's check, and we get in the name of the victim, and we get it back to the victim. So there's roles that law enforcement can play. So that's why I encourage you to find somebody in your area who's willing to do that. Of course, if you find somebody or need help, I will help whoever that is, but understand that that's a thing, that is something that can happen, and that we do that when we need to. Next slide. Okay, so business identity theft. This is where, and again, this is where you need to check with your Secretary of State's policies and procedures about how you set up your business entities. In the state of Colorado, for example, they're very pro-business, and the bad guys know this. There's certain states that are easier to establish businesses than others. So for the state of Colorado, somebody can go on there. If you have not secured your business, which I'll talk about, someone can go onto the website of the Secretary of State and make changes online to make Tracy the managing partner, registered agent, owner of whatever company that's been around since 2005. Now I can print out a certificate of good standing and potentially go and open up business lines of credit, especially online. And the original owner has no knowledge of this until later. So that is business identity theft. They are going to then take that information. A lot of times they will order phones. It's really easy to order phones if you're a new business. That may be changing, but that's been the case. So that's essentially business identity theft is somebody taking over your business in that way, but it also could be them mirroring your company or starting a website that looks to be like a legitimate company. They're using your name, but they're collecting information and credentials and communicating with people, having them purchase laptops, or it happens a lot. So it could be that way, somebody using a company's name, but not necessarily making the changes on the Secretary of State, if that makes sense. So you can, next slide. So again, it's as I mentioned, they can secure loans. A lot of times, one of the things that business identity theft to look out for is this. A lot of times they will, somehow or another, a bad guy will find an EIN number, right? And then they will start, like I saw one victim where they started opening up and building relationships with several different payroll companies, like third-party payroll companies. And this happened continuously. So we're getting calls. The victim was finally notified of it, but the amount of fraud, like that EIN number is out there now. It's almost impossible to stop the damage at that point that could happen with that EIN number and opening lines of credit and the damage that it could do to a person's business. So what we have done with a situation like that, for example, is two things. If you're a victim of ID theft and your tax information has been compromised in that way, you can go ahead and change that, although it is a very painful process, it feels like, but you can change that with the IRS because of fraud. And so law enforcement can help you with that. There's a form and a process that you can do to complete that. So you actually, if you become a victim in that way, there's a process to start over, kind of like a new Social Security number, right? It's not easy, but you really don't have a choice, because once that number's out there, we don't know and can't control what it is they're doing with it. So one of the ways that we try and monitor business ID theft is through the help of the fraud folks at Dun & Bradstreet, who work a lot and very closely with us on the business identity theft, kind of business credit, and they can help that way. So if a customer, you guys aren't we refer folks to Dun & Bradstreet too for fraud alerts, just like you would on your personal credit report. You can do that with Dun & Bradstreet as well. And they work with us to help identify fraudulent companies. And they will even reach out to us to say, hey, this is a look right here in Colorado, and you guys, can you go ahead and take a look and contact this business? So those are two different resources that you can have if you are a victim of business ID theft. So I don't want you to think that It's a little bit different than a personal ID theft process, but it can be still very painful because you have lines of credit in your name potentially, and how do you start to combat that? And so we have victim advocates in our unit. Again, literally all they do is help people work through that process so they know what steps to take to correct the fraudulent transactions or loans with their business. So just an example of the Colorado side, you can see this would be the website for Colorado Secretary of State. And when you look up your business, whatever kind of business it could be, and I want to stress the importance of something too, for businesses that may have been expired or old from a long time ago, that are just inactive companies, what bad guys do, they'll go in and they will just, for $50, it's a brand new company. And it looks like on the certificate of good standing or some of the documents that it's been around since 1985, when in reality, they just made it new again. So whatever kind of process that folks have internally with establishing new companies, just recognize that a part of due diligence would be, okay, you know, maybe if you're looking at a business to just make it a part of the process to jump on the Secretary of State's website, wherever you are, you can see the filing history, you can see the history. If you notice a recent change, that's a red flag that something might not quite be going on that should be happening. So, so just as something to think about. And if you notice in the back, on the bottom here on the slide, it says set up a secure business filing. In the state of Colorado, you have the option to have a PIN number mailed to whatever the mailing address is on file for the business. They'll send you a hard copy PIN number. So if you want to make any changes to that account at all, you have to use the PIN number. I personally think that should be on everybody's business, but they don't make it mandatory. They make it free and optional. The second option is an email notification, sort of like a fraud alert. I prefer and advise people to do both. If you are in the process where you have a lot of clients or businesses that you deal with on a regular basis, I would stress that you look at your Secretary of State's website and try to make sure that whatever security options they have available, that you take advantage of all of them. And you not only do them for the companies that you have now, you go back to all the companies and LLCs that you've had previously as well. So this is just some sort of stats that we have here in Colorado for our unit. And what's so interesting, we have business identity theft, but we also have businesses that we call made out of whole cloth, that are just fraudulent shell companies for different nefarious purposes. So those go into the thousands, and those aren't even in here. That's a whole different scheme. But you can see that in 2018, we had a pretty big uptick in business ID theft cases. Some of these we've actually been able to charge. We've had a few successful cases where we actually were able to charge some folks for doing the business identity theft. So that's good. So again, you can see the impacts that this has to especially small businesses who may not understand what is happening. It can really damage their credit, and you know, pretty quickly. It takes a lot for small businesses to get back up on their feet after being a victim of this. So just something to think about as you move forward, and what kind of prevention techniques that you can have ahead of time. Or just monitoring your Duns and Bradstreet number if you have one, and double checking that your business filings are correct. And you know what? I mean, we all Google ourselves all the time. I mean, I have done that in the past, but you know, Google your company every once in a while, especially if it's, you know, see if there's anything out there that you need to be aware of. If there is, then notify law enforcement. We usually try and get spoofed websites shut down as quickly as we can. A lot of times there's not much more we can do, but just something to think about. And you know, with a lot of talk about training was here today, I think the most important thing to realize is that people are aware of, you know, two-factor for everything. Two-factor authentication that we have on our email could be set up, obviously, with our retirement accounts. I think it's really important that people understand that that should go for everything that we have, and just training and policies and procedures is really important. I think the more important thing to understand, again, is that if you are a victim of a wire fraud or some sort of compromise, it's as if you become, I don't know, on the special list, right? And you will be targeted again. And so if you look at it like that, like people are constantly re-victimized, especially if they're individuals of those romance scams who are just really vulnerable. They are re-victimized constantly. And so it's like you go over to some separate list where, oh, they fell for it, so put them over here. And so I always tell companies, if you've been compromised once, they're going to keep trying, and they may keep trying a year from now, but be aware that they more than likely they're going to try the same scam or something similar again. So that's about it. There's a lot more we could talk about, but if anybody has any questions, let me know. Again, if you're in Colorado, you can always reach out to us. We have a lot of great counterparts in other states as well that work with these same kind of cases in cybercrime that we do. So if you need referrals for any reason, let me know that as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tracy. I think first question is do you carry a gun?
Yes.
I think everybody was wondering that question. Second question is, that was more me. And the second question was, what was the most interesting case you've worked on, maybe year to date, if you can, maybe if you can share. I don't know if you can.
Interesting. Wow. So I've worked a lot of, I work a lot of internal and company embezzlement cases. Those are very interesting because what you soon realize, and as a fraud examiner, of course, we're exposed to, you hear all these trends that are very common things and patterns of behavior. And once you start to look at these embezzlement cases for businesses, that it really is opportunities. It's these companies that have trusted employees that have been around for a long time that see vulnerabilities no different than you would in any organization, and they find a way to manipulate that. So I would just probably, I can't really talk too much because I'm working on one now, but I will say that always just be aware, like if you're a business owner or a manager, just be aware of processes that have been around for a really long time, and that probably, if you know what, not that you're not trusting anyone, right, but that they probably should just all be revisited because of internal controls and whatnot. Just go back and take a look and try and do that. That's just my suggestion.
Perfect. Well, I've been worried about Aaron for a long time, so yeah. You did get a new boat this year. That was kind of awkward. Aaron, you got some questions? You don't have to. You don't have any. Just saw you pop on.
I don't have any questions. I thought it was great.
Yes.
Yep.
I did as well. So, Lance, you have any?
Yeah, you bet. Tracy, great job. I was going to go down a different road with the questions, but Mike asked about the gun, and I decided I would not tease. I would not poke the bear at all. So, I do have a question from the audience for your quick chat answer. Whoever comes up with the best definition of a romance scam wins the final prize. So Tracy, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you taking time to help educate our audience. It was super, super valuable. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Yep, you bet. All right, and it's time for me to kind of wrap it up. What I'd like to do is give the floor to Aaron Beal, our Chief Operating Officer, and let him make a few closing remarks. Aaron?
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating, especially the speakers and the team that put this webinar to put it together. I'm sure next year, for sure, we're going to be in person again. Don't want to do this again next year, although it has been great. Thought I'd just take a minute and share with you and give you some insight to one of the most common questions I get asked when we meet with our banking clients. We get the question of, or I get the question of, what are other banks doing, right? So we have these banks in various parts of the country. What are other banks doing? And so I thought I'd share with you a couple of those trends. And of course, this is related to IT and IT security. There's really three trends that really come to mind, and two are security, and we covered one of them today of the three. But the two biggest security trends that we're seeing in the last 12 to 18 months, and it's continuing, is the deployment of SIM. So SIM stands for System Security Information Event Management. And think of it as a Swiss Army knife of security. It does everything from reporting, threat intelligence, threat detection, log management, right, which was talked about quite a few times today. It really helps with incident response. And it enables, compliance, and for major, the major ones like GLBA, GDRP, SOX. So when it comes to that compliance, it provides really great reporting. But more than anything, what it does and why it's so effective to deploy this security tool, not that one tool does everything, but this is one of the best ones, is that when someone has a breach, we may not know unless we have some kind of logging and detection system. And breaches often happen, we don't know about them, or you won't know about them as the executive of the company are responsible for IT till potentially months and months after it's already occurred. Because when they get into that endpoint, they often will take their time making their way through the rest of the environment. And if there's not something there that catches that early, that's problem number one. But let's say that you have great backups and all of that is great and you can absolutely recover it. You've tested it every year. Well, if, for example, if a ransomware attack happens, we can't just recover from backup until we know where the breach was. Who was the end user? Where did they go to? If we just bring back everything back online, how do we ensure that things won't get encrypted again? And unless we have some type of log management /SIM in place that provides a forensics path to go in and figure out where that hole was and what the path was, it's very difficult to turn things back on. And so that's a very critical component nowadays, is to have some type of SIM solution. And we see a lot of our banks doing that, and a lot of them have had it in place for a while, but that's certainly been a big trend. Another one is just this growth of the Microsoft 365 stack, which we talked about some today. We didn't get into some of the security pieces specifically, but I encourage you, if you're looking at Microsoft 365 or Office 365 and you're just using it for email today, or you haven't migrated there yet, don't see Microsoft 365 as just the email platform. I know it's very easy to fall into the trap of, here's what we pay for email today on premise, this is what Microsoft is online, but it's so much more than that. And we shared a little bit with you on that today with Power BI. But there's also a lot of security functions as well: encryption, multi-factor authentication, DLP, conditional access, cloud app security. I mean, there is a whole set of security services there that allow you to consolidate your services and add some great ones that most banks don't have today, because there's not much to compete with it, like conditional access, which makes sure that certain conditions are met when someone logs in, like where they're geographically located, what's on their machine, all of that type of stuff. And so there's a lot there. And then the third is also with the Microsoft stack, but it's not security. It's what we shared with today, which is Power BI. And you saw how powerful that is, but that is just one tool of the Power stack, because there's Power Automate and Power App. So Power Automate is really what it sounds like, and that's helping automate this stuff going on in Microsoft 365 as far as processes in the background. And then Power App is just an incredible tool where for a very inexpensive investment, you can create an internal app for whatever you'd like it for. So asset management, tracking certain type of transactions. You can make it secure and provide it to your users in a mobile app. And so instead of going out in the marketplace and spending $30,000, $40,000 on an app, you can spend several $1,000s and create that same app. And so there's a lot there with the Microsoft 365 platform that email is just a small component of it. And of course, you can contact us to learn more about any of these items that we covered today. And then I think you also are going to get an invite, Mike, for our event next year, which will be in person, which will be probably a day or a day and a half. So Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. No, I just wanted to let everybody know that we'll have our third annual summit next year. Probably same place in Huntington Beach. Friday, October 29th. After we end today, which will last for about another minute, you'll get a survey from us, and if you can, I think it's 3 or 4 questions. If you could just answer, that'd be very helpful for us in understanding what was important. If there's any follow-up that needs to happen, we don't want to be presumptuous, but we would love to, interact with you in whatever way you feel is necessary on that. But again, all the speakers did a fantastic job. We've gotten great comments. I've gotten numerous emails already from people that attended saying, hey, great job, things of that nature. So again, Tracy, Richard, Bob, Lindy, Chris, fantastic. Lance, great job of emceeing like you always do. You do it 10 times better than I do. Aaron, you did a good job. I'm proud of you. Thank you for everything. Lance, I'll
You too, Mike.
Thanks. Lance, I'll let you you finish it up.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Mike. I'll rehash a couple of the things that Aaron and Mike said just for everybody's attention. You're going to be getting a survey here shortly. We really value that information. We plan to do this every year. Highly encourage you to give very honest feedback. The more honest you can be about the good, the bad, and the ugly, the better we can make this event and more effective for you next year. So we're really looking forward to October 29th. You'll be getting that invitation shortly. So keep an eye out for it, save the date, and we'll see you this time next year. Everybody have a wonderful day. Be safe.
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.